What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was a failure, but the Forest of Death awakened his true power? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. His eyes opened to a peculiar scene. It was late in the evening and he was standing still on the shoreline of an unfamiliar river. The last rays of red light faded into blue as the sun started to disappear behind the horizon. An evening picked up, he could hear the breeze rustling through the reeds along the shore. In the background, the subtle echo of waves could be heard as they caressed the white sand along the shoreline. I've never been here before, but it feels so real. He noticed he was standing completely still, his eyes firmly focused on a figure standing opposite him. The occasional chirping of a cricket was all that disturbed the silence between the two of them. It was almost deafening. "Oboro!" He heard a woman roar. He winced as the voice shattered the silence like glass. He would have turned to give the woman a piece of his mind, but found he could not. His body wouldn't move. "Who's Oboro?" So instead of turning to confront the rude voice, his eyes stayed fixed on the figure in front of him. The figure was an oddly dressed man who looked like an eccentric noble from old times. He wore a white haori over a dark blue kasode with dark blue hakama pants. His long black hair was tied loosely in a ponytail and he had thick eyelashes which gave him a feminine appearance. He looked young, not much older than 20, but there was an air of authority about him that was incongruous with his youthful appearance. What was most disconcerting was the katana the man grasped in his right hand. That and the fact that his eyes were firmly clamped shut. What's going on here? As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he felt his head turn and his eyes move down to examine his own hand. That was when he started to panic. He wasn't in control of his own body. He was powerless, a mere silent witness trapped in the body of another. He briefly recognized the fact that he was holding a tanto, but that concern was overridden by the knowledge that this body was certainly not his own. As he looked down at the hand through the eyes of another, he saw not the hand of a 6-year-old boy, but the delicate hand of a young woman. Instead of a light tan, the color of his own skin, the skin was white like porcelain. The fingers that wrapped around the tanto appeared fragile, like they would break if the slightest bit of pressure was put on them. Who is this? His vision shift back to the man as his body started stumbling forward across the white sand like a marionette on strings. He could feel his feet sink into the soft sand as he closed the distance between himself and the man with the katana. 1 step, 2 step, 3 steps, 4. He tried to stop, but the body remained unresponsive. He could feel tears falling down his face as he came to an abrupt stop in front of the man who had remained completely still and unresponsive. He found his mouth moving on its own accord as he heard the words, "I love you, Genosuke-sama." The voice was definitely female. He felt his hands tighten around the tanto and his pulse quicken as his heart reacted to threat of imminent violence. At this point he felt his body move and raise the tanto to the man's chest. "I'm going to kill him. Stop." Just as he believed he was about to become a murderer, something unexpected occurred. Instead of piecing the man's chest, his tanto reversed its course and plunged straight into his own heart. Naruto woke up screaming, clutching his chest where he felt the blade enter and end his life. The remnants of the dream were still present and he could feel a sharp stab of pain in his heart which was hammering against his rib cage. The dream had left his body covered in a thick coating of sweat. His sheets felt damp. One of those dreams again. They always feel so real. Oboro. The name was foreign to him, yet felt unknowingly familiar at the same time. He felt as if he should know who that was, but he was certain that he knew nobody by that name. "I'm going crazy." Naruto had been having these dreams for the last few months. This one had been the worst yet. They didn't occur often, or at least they didn't used to. He had been having the dreams more frequently over the last month or so. This was the third one this week, and in every single one of them he was in someone else's body. All he could do is watch as the dreams progressed and end, usually with him dying or killing someone. "Maybe I should talk to the old man about them," thought Naruto. The woman and the other people in his dreams must be ninjas. They were amazing fighters and he had seen some of them use crazy jutsu like turning into water or blowing gusts of wind from their mouths. He quickly discarded the idea though. If he told the old man he was having dreams about killing people or ending his own life, the old man would probably send him to a psychiatrist to have his head examined. It's not like it would be unexpected after everything that had happened to him. With a sigh, he pulled himself out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom. He let out a huge yawn as he walked. He definitely wasn't getting anywhere near enough sleep. As he made his way into his bathroom, he frowned at the state of it. Mold everywhere, bin overflowing, backed up toilet. Maybe I should clean this place up a little, at least it's not as bad as the kitchen, Naruto thought as his mind brought up images of discarded ramen cups and dirty dishes. Putting the horrible thought of impending chores aside, he went to the sink to brush his teeth, only to jump back in shock as he looked in the mirror. There, staring straight at him, was the face of a beautiful woman. Instead of a short boy with spiky blonde hair and bright blue eyes, he found himself looking at a young woman in her mid to late teens with long black hair and a pair of beautiful amethyst eyes. He stared into those eyes in shock as they gleamed right back at him like two stars in the night sky. What? He quickly blinked and shook his head. He thought he felt a slight burning sensation in his eyes, but dismissed it. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself looking at his usual sky blue eyes, whisker marks and sunlight blonde hair. Great, now I'm even dreaming while I'm awake. Naruto tried to put the weirdness of his morning behind him as he grabbed Gamma-chan and ran to his favorite place in the world, Ichiraku Ramen. He ignored the glares and comments from the villagers as he rushed by. His skin had gotten thicker over the years and they wouldn't distract him from his ramen. "Hey Naruto," greeted Teuchi as Naruto arrived at the small restaurant. "Morning Teuchi-san," said Naruto. He took his usual seat at the bar. He always had some trouble getting up there, but he got it eventually. "The usual Naruto?" Teuchi asked. "You bet." Naruto's usual was enough to feed a large family. "Ayame, Naruto's here," yelled Teuchi as he went out back to make Naruto order. "Good morning Naruto-kun," greeted Ayame as she came out to the front of the store. The older girl was probably the closest thing he had to a friend. "Hey Ayame-chan," greeted Naruto. Ayame frowned when she saw Naruto. "Naruto-kun, what's wrong?" "What? Nothing," replied Naruto a little too quickly. "Naruto," said Ayame in a stern tone. Naruto knew better than to ignore her. "It's nothing Ayame-chan, I just had a bad dream." "A nightmare?" Naruto gave Ayame a nod, but didn't explain it. The vividness of the suicide was still affecting him. It felt so real. After breakfast, Naruto wandered aimlessly through village, though he kept a keen awareness of his position. Some places in the village just weren't safe for him, a lesson he had learned the hard way. At least he was safe in broad daylight. Sort of. He didn't go out at night anymore. As he moved through the streets, he could feel the heated glares on his back. It was nothing new. Almost everyone in Konoha hated him and they weren't shy about showing it. Sometimes he wondered why the villagers singled him out. It never made any sense to him. None of other kids were treated the same as he was. None of them were kicked out of shops, spat at on the street, or treated like they didn't even exist. That last one always hurt the worst, but he had gotten used to it. He had been alone his entire life and always would be. The isolation still hurt sometimes. The old man, Teuchi and Ayame were the only ones who ever talked to him. Even kids his own age stayed clear of him. That, or they threw rocks at him and called him a freak. Naruto wasn't an idiot, quite the opposite in fact. Even though he couldn't read or write, he was extremely observant. He had figured out some time ago that the Kyuubi attack was linked to his treatment by the village. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. The fact that many of the adults kept calling him demon brat, and that October 10th was his birthday made it clear that he had some connection to the Kyuubi attack 6 years ago, though the exact nature of that connection still eluded him. Nevertheless, he was proud that he made the connection. He hadn't even been to school yet. The old man always said he was clever. While these thoughts were running through his head, he found that he had wandered close to the large forest outside Konoha. Naruto stopped in his tracks. The forest was a no-go zone for him or anyone for that matter. The old man had told him that the place was very dangerous and he didn't want to end up in hospital again. How did he even get here? This area was off limits anyone except experienced ninja. Confounded, he was about to turn when he felt something tug at him. It felt like someone was physically pulling on his sleeve, trying to direct him towards the forest. What is that? Naruto ignored the feeling and turned to go back, but as it did his vision blurred. It felt like he had been hit with an extreme case of nausea, that or poison. He still remembered what that felt like. He sunk to the ground as his knees buckled, and then all he saw was darkness as he lost consciousness. As his eyes opened, he found himself on a narrow mountain path surrounded by mist. Moisture was heavy in the air and the ground underfoot was damp enough that he could feel it through his footwear. Is this another dream? I remember collapsing then. If it was another dream, it was different. Unlike his previous dream, he had full control over his body. His feet moved where he wanted them to and his eyes looked where he directed them. That's a positive, Naruto thought as he peered into the mist. But where am I? Of course, the other option was that someone had dumped his body somewhere while he was unconscious. He frowned at that thought. He wouldn't be surprised if someone took advantage of the situation to get rid of him. It wouldn't be the first time. I hope this isn't somewhere deep in the forest, thought Naruto with a slight bit of panic. He drew a deep breath and calmed down so he could take a closer look at his surroundings. It didn't look like the forest. Sure, he could see trees, but they were nowhere near as big as the ones that made up Konoha's forest. It also looked like the area was much more hilly than Konoha, and when was the last time there was mist in Konoha? Against his better judgment, Naruto decided to start moving. He didn't have a lot of options. Either follow the path or stay where he is. Naruto didn't think wandering into the mist aimlessly was a good idea either. So the only feasible option was to follow the path. Although he didn't show it, Naruto was worried. That last dream ended with me dying, and this one feels even more real. What if? He didn't know how long he walked through the mist. It could have been a few minutes or several hours, he couldn't tell. Time seemed to work differently here. Eventually he stopped walking when he walked face first into a brick wall and fell flat on his ass. Ow, that hurt. Naruto looked up at what he ran into and was surprised to see a large wall. How did I not see that? The mist isn't that thick. He noticed that there was a wooden sign mounted on the wall. He squinted a bit as he looked through the mist, trying to make out the words on the sign. It was pointless since he couldn't read, but for some reason he seemed to know exactly what it said. Iga Subagakure. As soon as he read the words, he felt the ground start to collapse beneath him. In a panic he tried to move, but it was to no avail as the ground fell away beneath him. A silent scream escaped his lips as he fell through the hole and into the abyss. His descent was abruptly cut off when he came into contact with the ground, hard. He was dazed by the fall, but managed to open his eyes. He must have hit his head hard because the last thing he saw before losing consciousness was a giant stone room and a woman in red. Naruto let out a groan as he slowly opened his eyes. My head, I think I broke something. As he woke, he tried to remember what happened and where he was. Looking around, it seemed that he was lying in a stone room. Rays of sunlight were filtering in through the hole he made in the ceiling. Wait, hole, ceiling, mist? The last thing he remembered was running through that weird mist, hitting a wall and the sign. Yes, he remembered the sign. Iga Subagakure. He'd never heard of it. Naruto sighed. What did I get myself into this time? So you're finally awake, little one. A female voice intruded on his thoughts. Naruto as he jumped up off the ground with a start. He hadn't sensed anyone near him and his senses were extremely sharp, having lived on the streets for a few years in the past. Had one of the ninjas found him? Naruto's eyes darted around the room trying to locate whoever had startled him. He quickly located the source of the voice and only one thought came to mind as he laid eyes on her. Beautiful. Standing to his right in a relaxed pose was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He briefly wondered how it took so long for him to notice her, before he went back to staring. She had midnight black hair that shimmered like silk in the sunlight. It was tied back loosely, allowing her fringe to fall across her face like water cascading down a waterfall. She had light honey brown eyes which he noticed were sharp, a little cold, and glowing with intelligence. Though right now he could tell that she was looking at him with more than a little bit of humor. Naruto's eyes focused in on her cherry red lips that contrasted sharply with the woman's flawless porcelain white skin. The black hair and red lips coupled with the woman's pale complexion gave her the appearance of a cold feminine beauty. I hope she won't do anything mean to me, thought a jaded Naruto. Several experiences in the past had left him extremely distrusting of strangers. He took a deep breath and tried to take a few steps backwards, but felt his back come into contact with the wall. Oh, nowhere to run, thought Naruto as he tried desperately to stave off panic. He hated being cornered. Bad things happened to him when he got cornered. With nowhere to run, he took a better look at the woman in the hope that she was one of the few who didn't hate him. She was dressed in a blood-red kimono, which was tied together loosely by a yellow sash. Her kimono was quite fitting, accentuating a very curved figure. To say she was voluptuous would be an understatement. Such things held no meaning to Naruto, but he knew the old man and other males in the village would go crazy at the sight of her. She also had what looked like a short katana strapped to her sash. The woman suddenly spoke up, once again startling Naruto. "If you're finished staring, perhaps we can move on with introductions," she said with a grin. One finely arched eyebrow suggested she found his staring amusing rather than offensive. Who are you?" asked a flustered Naruto. "Focus, Naruto. Don't let the pretty lady distract you. Wait until she's not watching and run." His inner flight response had just kicked in. What's this? You know it's customary to give your own name before asking someone for theirs," replied the woman with her melodic voice. She seemed to be in the mood to tease Naruto. "Is it?" wondered Naruto. He vaguely recalled the old man telling something similar before. "Wait, doesn't she know who I am? Everyone knows who I am." The whisker marks are a dead giveaway, thought Naruto. He was confused. In Konoha everyone seemed to know who he was. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto," he answered in a cautious tone. It was a good sign that she wasn't openly hostile, but he also knew better than to let his guard down. He had been deceived before and was ready to bolt at the first sign of anger or recognition from the woman. "Is that so?" The woman was looking at him curiously. "Well, Naruto-kun, my name is Akeginu. It's a pleasure to meet you. You're the first to visit this tomb in a long, long time." The woman had replied without hesitation. It seemed she truly did not recognize him. "At least something is going right for me." "Wait. Did she say, tomb? What do you mean, tomb?" Naruto asked, voicing his thoughts. "You don't know? How odd. You're currently standing in the ruins of Iga Tsubagakure, the last remnants of what was once the most powerful ninja clan Japan," answered the woman. Naruto detected a little bit of pride in her voice. Strange. Iga clan? Japan? I've never heard of the Iga clan and or this place called Japan. He had no idea what she was on about. He took another look at the woman. It looks like she was serious. He didn't know what to make her. In fact, he was starting to think the woman might be a little crazy. Just my luck, I finally meet someone who doesn't hate me, and they turn out to be crazy. Now that I think about it, that's probably the only reason why she didn't recognize me in the first place. She's been in a mental institution for the last decade. I've never heard of the Iga clan or this place called Japan, stated Naruto. Well, of course not. The Iga clan has been extinct for well over 1,000 years, replied the woman. She had an amused smile on her face as she watched him frown. Yep, crazy. You sure can pick him, Naruto. He started to think of a way to blow the pretty lady off without hurting her feelings. After all, even though she was crazy, she still was nice to him. It was a novel experience for him. What's with that look? The woman asked, interrupting Naruto's escape plans. What look? Naruto didn't make eye contact. He was hoping to maintain the appearance of innocence. I wasn't trying to escape at all. The woman wasn't buying it. Don't give me, what look? You're looking at me like I'm crazy. It seemed like that irked her a little, or a lot, thought Naruto as looked at the pronounced twitch developing above her right eye. Definitely a lot. Naruto decided to try a subtle approach. Well, no offense lady, but, are you crazy? I mean, you pretty much told me that you've been hanging out in a 1,000-year-old graveyard from a place that doesn't exist, said Naruto. I'm good, thought a slightly delusional Naruto. The woman's twitch became even more pronounced. I'm not crazy, kid. I suggest you have a look at your surroundings before you go questioning people's sanity. These ruins are obviously very old, replied the annoyed woman. Since the crazy woman was being so vocal about it, Naruto decided to humor her and take a closer examination of his surroundings. He was in what appeared to be the ruins of an old house. It looked different from anything he had seen before. He could see outside the building he was in, and to his surprise there were a number of other buildings in similar condition. He supposed they might indicate that this was indeed the ruins of some village. He could also see what looked like a large courtyard and the remnants of what had once been a wall. Was that what I ran into? Looking upwards, Naruto was surprised to see that the whole village was encased in a natural cavern-like structure. The roof of the cavern rose up high around the village but was open in the center, allowing sunlight to filter down into the ruins. It appeared to be a natural formation that had formed around the village. All right, there may be some truth to what she says. It looks like this place is really the ruins of some old village. But 1,000 years old? That would mean this tomb was around long before Konoha was ever founded, so how come no one knows about it? Also, if that's the case, then who the hell is this woman and how does she know so much about this place? Naruto decided to voice some of these questions. Hey lady, if these ruins are so old, why hasn't anyone ever found them? Shouldn't half this stuff be in a museum or something? Naruto looked at the pretty lady again and asked, are you some sort of treasure hunter? A melodious laugh escaped the woman's lips. No, I'm certainly no treasure hunter. As to why no one has found this place, well, that's simple. It's very well hidden. The woman paused before narrowing her eyes at Naruto. Now that I think about it, how did you get in here? Naruto shrugged. I don't know. I was near the big forest when I collapsed for some reason. When I woke up I was lost in the mist. Wait, you were in the mist? That can't be right, said the woman. He could hear the confusion in her tone, which only served to confuse him even more than he already was. Why couldn't he be in the mist? Why not? Naruto asked. Well, the mist is special, Naruto-kun. It's meant to keep people away from this place. You can't just walk straight through it. That's why after all these years no one's ever found this place. It unconsciously directs people's attention elsewhere. People just don't notice it. Not to mention there are other protections in place to ensure no one ever trespasses here. No one has disturbed these ruins for over 1,000 years. Naruto didn't know how to respond to that. If what the woman said was true, then he could only wonder how far he was from the village, and worry about how he was going to get home. Do you know how far I am from the village? Naruto asked. Hopefully the crazy lady knew the way back. You mean that town outside the forest? The woman asked. You know about the forest? Naruto asked in hope. Of course, you're standing in the middle of it. It hasn't been here that long, but it now surrounds the ruins entirely. Quote. Naruto just gaped at that. How did I get into the middle of the forest alive? I could have been killed. Gigi always said that dangerous creatures lived in the forest. Wait, what did she mean when she said the forest hasn't been here that long? It's always been here. Naruto said as much to the crazy lady, who just smiled back at him. No, the forest hasn't always been here. It sprung up overnight a little over a century ago. It was very weird. Trees just sprung out of the ground everywhere. It changed the landscape dramatically, replied the crazy lady. Weird, she is talking as if she was there, thought Naruto. I still don't understand how you got here though. The rulers from my time took a lot of precautions. They didn't want anyone disturbing the dead or entering this place ever again. It's impossible to just stumble in here, said Akeginu more to herself than to him. Naruto froze when she said that. What do you mean your time? Oh, sorry, I didn't explain properly, my fault. I've actually been here for the last 1,000 years or so, said the crazy lady with a smile. Naruto stumbled backwards, but once again a brick wall stopped his retreat. There is no way a human would still be alive after so long. Kami, I hope she's not a ghost. What are you then, some kind of ghost or zombie? Naruto asked in a frightened voice. He was crouching on the ground now. Zombie? Do I look like some rotting corpse to you? The zombie asked with a high degree of indignation. Look at my skin, there's not a blemish on it. Naruto's sweat dropped at the zombie's apparent shallowness. So you're a ghost then? Naruto asked. It was logical, if she wasn't a zombie then she was a ghost. But now he was really scared. Ghosts scared him more than anything. The ghost just looked annoyed. Will you calm down already? I'm not a ghost either. I'm what you would call a spirit. I'm bound to the ruins of Iga Tsubagakure for some reason I have yet to discover. I can't move on. I like to think of myself as the guardian of Iga's dark secrets. I'm sure you do, said a skeptical Naruto. What's that supposed to mean? The spirit asked. She sounded annoyed, again. Naruto didn't have much of an attention span, and seeing a chance to have some fun with the woman he quickly forgot about the fact that she might be a ghost, and decided to tease her. Let's face it, this place is buried underground, is located in the Forest of Death, and it looks like you haven't had any visitors here in about forever, so really there's no need for any sort of guardian. You're probably some homeless moocher or grave robber. A tick mark appeared above the spirit's right eyebrow before she yelled, Moocher. Grave robber. I'll have you know I was one of the most dangerous ninjas of Iga. With that being said, she smacked Naruto across the back of his head, hard. Ouch. That hurt. Wait, how did you hit me if you're a spirit? Asked Naruto, thinking he'd finally caught the woman out in a lie. After several hundred years I figured out how to make myself tangible. It only works while I'm in the ruins though. As soon as I leave the ruins I go back to being an intangible spirit and invisible to most people. You can leave the ruins? Naruto asked. Yep, I've been to that odd village outside several times before. No one can see me though, you're the first, replied the spirit. Wait, so you can show me the way back then? To the village? Sure, said Spirit with a shrug. Thank you Akeginu-san, said a suddenly more respectful Naruto, causing Akeginu to twitch again. Alright, I'll take you back out through the mist. I still have no idea how you got here though, said Akeginu as she took Naruto's hand and led him out of the ruins. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Akeginu watched the boy give her a wave and run off towards the village. She smiled at that. When was the last time she had experienced such childlike exuberance? As Naruto disappeared from her sight, her smile faded into a look of contemplation. How had the boy made it through the mist? She didn't believe his story about waking up there. Not that she thought he was lying, she would have seen straight through that. Rather, she believed he hadn't understood what had really happened. No one had made it through that mist since her time, and that old fox Tokugawa had made sure his monks sealed this place off nice and tight. It had worked for 1,000 years, was the protection failing? No, it was as strong as ever, she knew that. The boy, Naruto, was the key. She doubted she had seen the last of him, and through him she would find her answer. Interesting boy. I wonder if he knows that there's a demon inside him. 2 weeks later. To say that Naruto liked the ruins would be an understatement. He loved it. It was peaceful, almost tranquil. There were no people cursing or staring at him, and Akeginu let him do whatever he wanted. To top it all off, he was safe here. He found it funny that he was safer in a place called the Forest of Death than he was in the village. Akeginu-chan also treated him with respect, something he rarely received from anyone, and she was generally just a great person to hang out with. She was very knowledgeable, from his perspective, and she had started helping Naruto with his reading using some scrolls she had laying about. Naruto was pretty sure she was teaching him a different language, but Akeginu seemed to think it was just an outdated version of the current one, so he took her word for it. She also gave him a lot of attention, positive attention, which was something he never got in Konoha. She would always ask him questions about himself and he liked answering her. Though there was always that voice in the back of his head telling him not to tell her too much in case she started to hate him like everyone else. Much to Akeginu's dismay, Naruto had been coming to visit her on a regular basis, almost every day for the last 2 weeks. Apparently the mist was no longer an obstacle for him now that he had made it through the first time. It was a puzzle she had yet to crack. She also didn't know how he was traversing the forest without being hurt either. She had seen some of the predators in the forest, they were ridiculously large. How Naruto, a mere child, avoided them she would never know. The boy seemed to have a natural stealth about him though, and he had perfectly recalled the path she showed him the first time she took him out of the forest. He was obviously very intelligent, though it was quite clear he had received no education. Intelligence though did not explain how he was able to traverse dangerous territory with little to no training. An enigma, the boy was an enigma. On the positive side, Akeginu found herself enjoying Naruto's visits immensely. She had been bereft of human company for so long she had forgotten how it felt to have companionship. Although a highly competent and ruthless kunoichi, Akeginu was a compassionate woman when not on the battlefield, and Naruto was bringing out some of her more personable characteristics. It also helped that Naruto for some reason reminded her of Oboro. She had been Oboro's caretaker while the girl was growing up and had cared greatly for her. Deep down inside she felt that she had failed Oboro by not better preparing her for what was to come. In hindsight, it was no surprise that the seal with Kuga didn't last. 3. She should have prepared Oboro for the possibility of war with Kuga. Instead, the girl was both mentally and physically unprepared when the seal was broken and had become the worst thing to be in Ninja Clan during wartime, a liability. Akeginu and the rest of the Iga ninjas were forced to avoid or deceive Oboro in regards to actions taken against Kuga. It had also cost her clan the war since they had not been able to rely on the Iga clan's most powerful weapon, the mystic eyes. Those were dark days. She had watched loved ones die and turned her back on Oboro, her best friend, after the girl had refused to take part in the war. Looking back now, she was ashamed of her actions. She had been Oboro's caretaker and had essentially abandoned the girl to her fate. She couldn't help but think she was honoring Oboro's memory by helping Naruto. Her bout of nostalgia had been brought on by the stories of the past she had been telling Naruto. She had told him about Iga Tsubagakure, and about their blood feud with Kuga Manjidani. She had also told Naruto about the war and her own death. He liked ninja stories, and she liked telling them to him since it curbed his usual hyperactiveness. While she was explaining to Naruto what a shogun was and the politics of 16th century Japan, she noticed some bruising around Naruto's face near his eye. Worried, she asked, "How did you get that bruise, Naruto-kun?" Naruto's hands went to his face unconsciously. "Oh, this. I just got into a fight with some kids. Nothing serious." Akeginu sighed. She could tell Naruto was lying and called him on it. "You're lying, Naruto. You've been hit with something hard like a stick or a cane." She looked closer at the marks on Naruto's face, and judging by the size of the marks, they were made by an adult. She looked Naruto in the eyes. Naruto no doubt noticed that she looked very, very angry. "I'll ask again, who did this to you?" Naruto almost winced at the coldness of her tone before replying, "I don't know the name of the person who hit me, but it's nothing new. Pretty much everyone in the village hates me. When I went to buy some fruit this morning, the shopkeep hit me across the face with his cane. They usually only charge me extra for food or just shove outside and, call me a demon. They don't usually hit me because Gigi might notice and then they'll get in trouble." Akeginu could feel her blood boil as Naruto explained his treatment. "Someone is going to pay for this. Where are your parents, Naruto?" Akeginu asked, though she already knew what the answer would be. Naruto looked sad for a moment. "I don't have any, I'm an orphan." "It's all right, come here," said Akeginu before picking Naruto up in a hug. "Naruto, where are the people running the orphanage? A child your age shouldn't be buying food by yourself." "Oh, they kicked me out when I was 4. They didn't want me there. I spent a while living on the street before Gigi eventually found me and gave me an apartment for myself." To say Akeginu was furious would be an understatement. Trash. They abandon a child and have the nerve to call him a demon. Who do they think they are? She was no saint herself, but she was a trained killer. An orphanage abandoning a child in need and in an obviously hostile environment was simple child abuse. "I can't have my only connection with the world being treated like this. The way things sound, he'll be dead before he reaches the age of 10. Akeginu tried to find a solution to the problem, but could come up with only one course of action. "I'll have to train him. It's the only help I can give him. No secret techniques, of course, but I can teach him some taijutsu, maybe some shinobi iri movements. It's not a lot, but it should be enough to keep him alive. I'll also have to tell him about the demon. If one of those idiots in the village inform him, there's no telling how he'll react. He'd probably end up thinking he's the demon." Akeginu took a deep breath, determined to tell Naruto about his tenant. "Naruto, I think I know why the villagers call you a demon." "Really? Tell me, Akeginu-chan, tell me, please," pleaded Naruto. "Relax, Naruto-kun. I'll tell you, but before I do you have to promise that you won't overreact and will listen to everything I have to say," said Akeginu in a serious voice. "I promise," replied Naruto. "Alright then, Naruto, there's a demon sealed inside you, a particularly powerful demon." Naruto was shocked when Akeginu said that. "A demon? But, a demon? I guess this explains why I heal so quickly." It made sense, sort of. He always knew he was different, but a demon, he could never have guessed that. And what did Akeginu mean by sealed? "Now, this doesn't mean you're a demon, Naruto. I said, sealed inside you. You're a container, a jailer for a demon." Naruto gave Akeginu an annoyed look. Of course he wasn't a demon, he wasn't that dumb. If he were a demon, there was no way people would treat him like they did, they would be too scared. He was also pretty sure that he would feel a lot more powerful if he were a demon. Not that he knew anything about demons. "How did you know about the demon?" Naruto asked Akeginu. "I'm pretty sensitive to spiritual energy in this form, and you have more than I've ever sensed in another human being, plus I recognize the energy." "Really, what is it?" asked Naruto. He was curious as to the identity of the creature that was the source of his torment. The Kyuubi no Yoko. Naruto was speechless. The Kyuubi was the most powerful demon in existence. But wasn't the Kyuubi killed by the Yondaime Hokage? But Akeginu-chan, the Yondaime killed the Kyuubi no Yoko, said Naruto, wondering if she was mistaken or whether the stories were false. Wrong. Killing something that powerful is well beyond the capabilities of any human. I suspect that since they couldn't kill the demon, they did the next best thing, sealed into something. You, to be precise. Naruto was stunned. He sat still trying to digest and understand this new information. He couldn't believe it. The Yondaime, a man who he looked up to as a hero, had essentially ruined his life. Not only that, but Gigi must have known about this too, and judging by other people's reactions, the whole village must have known that the fox was sealed inside him. Gigi had been lying to him his whole life. Akeginu, seeing that Naruto was very distressed by this news, decided to give him a distraction. I can relate, you know. In my time ninja were feared, and none more so than the Iga Nen. We were forced to stay hidden in the darkness because people feared us, called us monsters because of our inhuman abilities, explained Akeginu. It is amusing to see ninja like this Yondaime Hokage being treated like heroes. When I lived, such a thing would have been unthinkable. Then again, what you call ninja and I call ninja are two different things. We didn't go around yelling the names of our technique to our opponents. We were assassins and spies who prided ourselves in our ability to complete missions without being detected. Naruto flinched at the mention of the Yondaime Hokage, but said to Akeginu, "You're not a monster, you're beautiful." Akeginu smiled at that. "Naruto, I've never showed you why I ranked amongst Iga's strongest ninjas, did I?" "Nope, I just assumed you were making it up," stated Naruto, feeling a little bit better now that Akeginu was going to show him some ninja techniques. Akeginu got a tick mark at this. "No, Naruto, I never showed you because it is a secret technique and we're not meant to show it to outsiders." "Then why are you showing me now?" Naruto asked, hopeful that she was indeed going to show him a secret jutsu. Ninja fascinated him since as long as he could remember. Maybe it was the Gigi's stories about the Yondaime Hokage, but whatever the reason, he had wanted to be a ninja the entirety of his short life. "There's no harm in it. I'm the last Iga and you can't copy the technique by just looking at it," replied Akeginu. With that remark, Akeginu took a deep breath. "Alright, here I go. Don't be scared. It'll look like I'm bleeding, but it's all part of the technique." Naruto looked expectantly at Akeginu as her eyes changed from their natural brown to a light gold and then, nothing. Naruto almost face planted. "I knew it, you're a fraud." "I'm not a fraud," Akeginu yelled. "What the hell just happened? I activated the technique and then it just collapsed," thought Akeginu as she tried to figure out why her technique didn't work. "Alright, let's try this again," said Akeginu as she activated the technique. This time she could feel her blood start secreting through the pores of her skin. Success. "You see, Naruto-kun, this is my blood projection technique." Akeginu looked over at Naruto to see that he wasn't even looking at her. "Hey Baka, will you look over here, I've got the technique working." Naruto looked over at Akeginu. As he did, Akeginu felt a sharp pain start her head and pulse down through her body. It felt like she had just been thrown hard into the ground. Her technique completely collapsed on itself as extreme nausea raked through her body. "Impossible. I'd recognize that sensation anywhere, and the neutralization of my blood projection. There's no doubt, Naruto has the mystic eyes." "But how? The Iga bloodline couldn't have survived all these years, could it? Over a millennia, it shouldn't be possible, yet the truth was staring her right in the face. Naruto has the mystic eye bloodline, therefore he was a descendant of the Iga clan. She'd just made the discovery of a lifetime, or several. Akeginu collected herself and got up off the ground. "Are you okay, Akeginu-chan?" Naruto asked. She gave him a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Naruto-kun, just a bit of nausea." "Alright, this changes everything. If Naruto has the fabled mystic eyes, then he must have Iga blood. I don't know how that's possible, but I have to teach him the Iga Ryu. I have no choice. I can't have the sole living descendant of the Iga clan being weak, nor can I just leave the sole descendant ignorant of his heritage. It would be a crime against my clan. I won't have the same thing happen to him that happened to Oboro." "Naruto, do you know what you just did?" Akeginu asked, attempting to broach the subject of his eyes. Naruto shook his head. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did. You completely neutralized my secret technique. Really? Naruto replied. To say Naruto looked skeptical would be an understatement. As far as he was concerned, he hadn't done anything except look at her. Yes, you have a dojutsu, said Akeginu. A what? Naruto asked. He wasn't familiar with the term. A dojutsu, they're an ocular technique. Most of them are bloodlines, and they're often very powerful. You have the Iga dojutsu called the mystic eyes. Essentially, it can neutralize any ninja technique through eye contact. Naruto looked stunned at how powerful that seemed, that and the fact that he had such a weapon. Wow, really? But Akeginu-chan, why hasn't it worked before? I've been attacked by ninjas in the village and my eyes haven't stopped any of those attacks. Akeginu bristled at the mention of ninja attacking him. They are going to regret ever laying a finger on Naruto-kun. Akeginu calmed herself before replying to Naruto's question. Your dojutsu had to awaken first. I'm not sure how exactly you awakened it, but it would have been noticeable. Have you had sore eyes recently? Back on the day we met my eyes hurt, then some strange things happened. I kept seeing a young woman with black hair and purple eyes in my dreams and even in the mirror. When we made eye contact, my eyes felt like they had just looked into the sun. But that almost sounds like Oboro. They must be related, thought Akeginu. Oboro's lineage was always a matter of debate in the Iga clan. She wasn't the head's child and no one knew who her parents were. So, her parents or a relative must have survived Tokugawa's purge. This certainly explains why Naruto was able to get through the mist. It would have no effect on his mystic eyes, thought Akeginu. Anyway, the point is, if you have the mystic eyes, therefore you must be a descendant of the Iga clan, which means technically as the last living descendant of the Iga clan all these ruins and all the Iga techniques belong to you, said Akeginu. She was excited. This must be why I was bound to the ruins. I'm to teach Iga's successor. Naruto was also ecstatic. He had always wanted to be a ninja and now he had access to the techniques of a whole clan. Gigi said he could enroll in the ninja academy when he was older, but now it looked like he could start learning much earlier. What happens now? Naruto asked. He wanted to begin training immediately. Now, I'm going to train you in the Iga Ryu, said Akeginu. Yes, yelled inner Naruto. So you're going to be my sensei? Yes, there's no other option. I'm the only one who can teach you the Iga Ryu, replied Akeginu. Akeginu started pacing back and forth, adopting what Naruto had come to call her sensei tone. We'll start with physical conditioning. You're malnourished, we'll have to fix that first. I'll show you how to hunt the local wildlife so that you have a reliable source of food. The hunting will also allow you to put your training into practice. I'll need to teach you how to move like a shinobi. If your pranks are anything to go by, you're a natural at stealth, but I'll teach you how to run without making a noise, how to move without being seen, and how to be invisible in plain sight. You'll be a ghost by the time I'm done with you. Naruto was practically jumping up and down now. Akeginu took a moment to think before continuing. It'll take a few months, but once we start getting you into shape, I'll start teaching you how to defend yourself. I'll show you my style of taijutsu and Iga's kenjutsu, shurikenjutsu as well. We're also going to be learning strategy and tactics. A ninja's mind is also a weapon and needs to be trained as well. So that means lots and lots of reading, said Akeginu with a smirk. But I'm not very good at reading, said Naruto. It was a lie, he couldn't read at all. Of course he isn't. I bet I was the first to show him how, thought Akeginu. Don't worry Naruto-kun, I'll teach you and we'll practice your reading a few hours every day. You'll be a good reader in no time. Akeginu took a minute to think about the logistics of her plans. She would have to have the boy move here. He obviously wasn't safe wherever he's staying now. The issue was that his presence would likely be missed. Surely the ruler of the village would check up on Naruto, even if it was only because Naruto had such power contained inside him. You're also going to have to move here. I don't know where you've been staying before, but wherever it is, it's obviously not very safe. Naruto looked like he was going to interrupt her, but Akeginu put a hand up and stopped him. Leave most of your stuff where it is, we don't want to arouse suspicion. Just take what's necessary. You'll still have to spend some time in the village, otherwise people will come looking for you. Plus I know how you like that ramen stuff, said Akeginu with a smile. By the time I'm done with you Naruto-kun, you'll be the strongest ninja the world has ever seen. Naruto smiled at that. For the first time in his life things were looking up for him. While the two were talking, neither of them noticed the lilac-colored specter watching on. Oboro smiled as she saw her old friend taking the boy in. Naruto was special, very special. Not just because he had her eyes. She had done her part, she could only hope Naruto would find the strength to do what she couldn't. Maybe he would be the one to end the cycle of hatred. With one last smile, Oboro started to fade from existence. As she faded into twilight, she wondered how long it would take for Akeginu to realize how special this boy truly was. 2 years later, Naruto aged 8. Bright rays of sunlight seeped through the large gaps in the cavern roof, illuminating 2 dancing figures in the courtyard below. Their movements graceful, both choreographed and improvised. One would move, the other would respond, and on they continued, back and forth, occasionally meeting in a clash of blood, steel and sweat. In between the sharp echoes of metal against metal, Naruto's labored breathing could be heard as he struggled to keep up with his teacher's frantic pace. Faster. You won't last long with reactions like that, Naruto, yelled Akeginu, her kodachi almost removing Naruto's head from his shoulders. Naruto said nothing as he felt the edge of her blade whisper past the top of his head. He was used to Akeginu's baiting. Whenever they sparred, she would tease, prod, chastise, mock, do just about anything to provoke a rash reaction out of him. It was simple provocation, a useful tactic to be sure, but he wasn't an idiot. Well, at least not anymore. He may have fell for that trick a year ago, but she had literally beaten the habit out of him. You could only get burned so many times before you finally learned your lesson. So this time he merely brushed the comment aside and focused on his next move. His actions enticed a small smile out of Akeginu. It seems she approved of his self-control. However, he wasn't given time to dwell on it as Akeginu quickly attacked again, unleashing a barrage of sword strikes at his body. Akeginu was a fast and athletic fighter. Her moves were characterized by speed and precision rather than brute force and strength. She had a habit of reversing her grip on her kodachi, often attacking him one-handed from just about any angle. This freed up her movements, allowing her to combine her kenjutsu with some impressive taijutsu moves and acrobatics. 1. He dodged most of her attacks and parried the ones he couldn't. Like Akeginu, he was using a kodachi. He had wanted a katana, but Akeginu told him he would have to wait until he was older and was better able to handle the increase in weight and length. He launched his own attacks at Akeginu. A slash at her shoulder, a thrust to her throat, however she flipped out of range with handspring before closing the gap between them with extraordinary speed. The blow she landed to his solar plexus brought him to his knees, retching. Damn it, he thought in frustration. I've been training like a madman for 2 years and I still can't touch her. It wasn't that he hadn't improved, his current self was incomparable to the weakling he was before, but Akeginu was just too good. She had an answer for everything he threw at her, and after 2 years of training he had a lot of moves to throw. Over the last 2 years Akeginu had taught him the fundamentals of Iga Ninjutsu, the Iga Ryu. Under her guidance he learned the basics of Iga's Kenjutsu, Taijutsu, Shinobi Iri, and Shuriken Jutsu. Initially, he wanted to learn Shoi Jutsu like the ninja in the village used. However, she quickly disabused him of that. A true ninja wields deception as a weapon, uses stealth and tactics to win a fight, not flashy moves. With the right strategy and the skills to implement it, he should be able to win most fights with a single well-aimed blow. Ninjas are creatures of subtlety, not brute force fighters. A ninja didn't need 1,000 different moves, just strong fundamentals, a sharp mind and a few well-rehearsed techniques. Akeginu felt that a small, familiar arsenal of techniques that he knew like the back of his hand was a better option than a huge collection of moves which he only had a partial understanding of. In her opinion, it was better to know how to use one techniques in 50 different ways than know 50 different techniques, but only know one application. It all made sense to him. On that basis, Akeginu had paid particular attention to his education in Shinobi Iri, the art of stealth, silent movement. She wanted him to be able to completely mask his presence, to be all but invisible. It was a lot easier to kill a target if they didn't know you were there. Much safer as well. Killing a target before the fight even began was a better approach than a direct conflict, no matter how you looked at it. In the last year he'd also familiarized himself with his mystic eyes. Akeginu was less help when it came to the dojutsu. She didn't have the eyes herself, and could only tell him that the ability to neutralize any ninja technique came when the dojutsu manifested and that it was always active. Nevertheless, he was determined to find out the limits of his eyes, and if possible discover how to turn his eyes on and off. In his opinion, it would be problematic if he neutralized an ally's technique during battle. It was true that he could completely neutralize any ninja technique, all that was required was eye contact. He'd practiced it with Akeginu. He'd been able to completely prevent her from using her creepy blood projection technique. He had also subtly tried it on some of the villagers. He'd discovered that by looking in the eyes of a Hyuga he could make them temporarily blind. Unfortunately, his mystic eyes were of little use when getting his ass kicked by a Keginu, since they only had limited applicability against Kenjutsu or Taijutsu. They could neutralize any justice used to enhance Kenjutsu or Taijutsu, such as a chakra-enhanced movement or an elemental technique, but had absolutely no effect on the basic style themselves or purely physical abilities. So against someone like a Keginu who was skilled enough to beat him by just relying on her Kenjutsu, his mystic eyes were useless, leaving him to rely on other techniques in his possession. Akeginu had taught him to never rely solely on his dojutsu no matter how powerful it was. It was sound advice. Akeginu examined her pupil from across the cavern floor. He'd changed dramatically over the last 2 years, maturing both physically and mentally. Long gone was that hideous orange tracksuit, she'd made him burn it immediately. Those moronic villagers were obviously trying to get him killed with that getup. Stealth and bright orange were not a good mix. He now wore a dark cassode with long sleeves which reached down to his hands. The distinctive feature of his clothes were his sleeves, which covered his entire arm and were considerably wider than regular. He wore a standard hakama for pants, with socks and sandals to complete his look. 2. His clothes looked black, but were actually an extremely dark navy blue. Pure black could stand out just as much as white in the darkness. The color was too hard, softer colors would define his shape less. It was the same outfit that a former compatriot of hers wore. Naruto flicked his blonde hair out of his eyes as he started to get up of the ground. He had grown his hair out long over the last 2 years and tied it back in a loose ponytail, though he allowed a few bangs to fall down in a fringe across his face. "Alright, I'm ready to go again, sensei," said Naruto, having gotten up after spending several minutes retching on the cavern floor. She smiled at him as he got back into his fighting stance. It was different from the one she used. For starters, he used a katana rather than a kodachi. She'd taught him Tenzen Yakushiji's kenjutsu as well as her own, and he had adapted very well to both forms, though he preferred to use the former. She wasn't arrogant enough to believe she was a better swordsman than Tenzen and could freely admit that Tenzen was the best swordsman in Iga. The man had perfected his style over centuries. She saw no reason why Naruto could not benefit from all that hard work, especially considering the similarities the boy shared with Tenzen. Both had a symbiotic relationship with a demon that gave them unbelievable regeneration powers. She wondered if Naruto would stop aging like Tenzen had. The man was at least 4 centuries old when he died. Tenzen's style meant Naruto's sheath was located on his waist rather than on the back like most ninja. Tenzen was adept at Batojutsu, and so Naruto would need to be as well. The Batojutsu was still a work in progress. They had gotten his sword from one of the storage vaults located in the ruins. That old fox Ieyasu had the Iga techniques sealed away, no doubt to prevent anyone else from ever using them again without his express permission. The bastard was too power-hungry to destroy the techniques completely. They were a potential resource after all. Instead, he had the techniques along with a lot of Iga weapons and writings sealed away by Hattori Hanzo and some monks in various vaults located throughout the village. She had managed to find and gain access to all of them over the years. Though she had only shown Naruto the weapons vault, she didn't want him reading some of the scrolls until he was ready. Kami, he could end up dead or disfigured like Jingoru, thought Akeginu with concern. After taking Naruto to the weapons vault, which was pretty much an underground armory, the boy picked out a katana. It had a dark wooden handle with no guard. The saya was made of the same dark wood, giving the katana the appearance of a curved piece of timber when sheathed. Thinking back over the 2 years, she concluded that she was very pleased with the boy's development. He was a natural ninja and was progressing at an astounding rate. Although that was no surprise, after all, he has Iga blood running through his veins. They were the best for a reason. He was a natural at Kenjutsu and was adapting to Tenzen's style well. He'd be quite formidable when he's older. She hadn't let his skill with the sword detract from the rest of his education though. He was coming along nicely in taijutsu, though she couldn't teach him Rusai's unique taijutsu since Naruto didn't have Rusai's unique body structure. She had no intention of changing Naruto's body like Rusai had done to his own. The man may have been able to stretch his limbs to any length, but he had stunted his own growth and was left deformed. Techniques like that was one of the reasons why the ninja of Iga were seen as monsters and were sealed away by Hattori Hanzo I. She wouldn't repeat past mistakes. The Iga nin of her time had been creatures of darkness. Naruto needed to be equally adept in both the light and the dark. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. That's enough for today, Naruto. Go cool down and have a rest. Naruto let out a relieved breath and collapsed to the floor with a thud. She smiled at the exaggerated collapse. He was far more reserved than when she first met him, no longer loud and brash, but he'd kept some of his eccentricities. Probably genetic, she thought. She looked at Naruto with something akin to approval in her eyes. She might not show it much, but she was proud of the boy. She knew Iga's ninpo training was brutal. But he needed to be prepared. Any weakness would prove fatal on the battlefield. Some pain now would save his life in the future. She let a slight smile form on her face. When she was done with him, Naruto would be the best nin Iga had ever produced. With the skills she taught him, the Tenzen-like healing that he got from that fox demon, and the mystic eyes, he'd have no equal. Especially among those fools playing ninja in the village, always yelling out their attacks. Idiots. On that note, it was time to add another weapon to Naruto's arsenal. She walked off towards the weapons vault intent on finding a particular item for Naruto. Naruto sat on a ledge overlooking the ruins. It was an amazing sight. The ruins themselves were nestled in a large cavern in the forest floor, surrounded by amazing natural rock features and beautiful greenery. It was likely that the village was once located in a valley of some sort as a stream flowed to the east of ruins. The water feature and natural sunlight which flowed through the large gaps in the cavern roof allowed for vegetation to flourish in the hollow, which also attracted a few animals. The place was beautiful and pretty inaccessible unless you knew where the hidden entrances to one of the connected cave systems were, or fell through the gap in the cavern roof like I did, thought Naruto. Naruto, do you know what this is? The question brought Naruto out of his thoughts. He looked over his shoulder at Akeginu who was approaching him with something in her hands. He took a closer look and noticed that she was holding some sort of extremely thin wire? That's ninja wire, replied Naruto. He recognized it. He'd seen something similar in one of the few ninja stores he was actually allowed into. Not quite, it's actually a rope, or more accurately a filament, said Akeginu as she uncurled the rope and held it out for Naruto to see. Naruto gaped at that. There was no way it was a rope. It was too thin, practically invisible to the eye unless viewed in the right light. Seeing Naruto's confusion, Akeginu continued. These are a special sort of filament developed by the Iga clan a long time ago. We call them Aben ropes. They're made from hair and have been treated with oils to make them as hard as steel. Hair? Naruto asked. Yes. Being made from hair makes them a lot finer, therefore harder to detect, and sharper than standard ninja wire. The Iga clan used a special form of alchemy to make the hair filament stronger than steel and more flexible than wire, replied Akeginu with a smile. She was proud of her clan's secret techniques. Akeginu paused for a moment as if reminiscing about something. They were used to devastating effect by a compatriot of mine named Yashimaru. He could use these ropes like they were an extension of his limbs. She remembered that no one could get near Yashimaru when he had all of his ropes in play. Unfortunately, those Kuga bastards had used deception to kill him. He always was a bit of a hothead, they wouldn't have gotten near him otherwise, regretted Akeginu. Naruto reached out to touch the wire. Be careful. They're extremely sharp. They're designed to cut through steel and bone. You could easily lose a finger if you're not careful, warned Akeginu. Naruto cringed at that and then gently grasped the ropes. They were incredibly fine, just like the hair they were made out of, yet as strong as steel. How the hell do you actually use these in battle? Naruto thought to himself. I'll need to show you the secret alchemy used to make them. The finer you can make the ropes, the sharper they'll be. Yashimaru used to make them from women's hair. You'll have to be creative in sourcing the raw material. Akeginu took a few seconds to consider what she said before adding, "You better stay away from my head." The threat of grievous bodily harm was heavily implicit in her words. "This is a secret technique, Naruto. I can't stress how important that is. You cannot show anyone how to make these ropes. If anyone finds out or spies on you making the ropes, you kill them." "Got it?" ordered a very serious Akeginu. Naruto nodded his head. She had warned him before about keeping the clan techniques secret. The techniques had been developed and cultivated over centuries and were extremely valuable. Any ninja would kill to get their hands on them. Naruto held up the rope and asked, "Am I going to be learning how to use this?" "Yes. It's a good idea to have a backup weapon. I'm pretty good with the kama, one-handed scythe. Myself," said Akeginu with more than a little pride, though she looked a bit wistful at the mention of the kama. "Free. You may even find that you're better with the Aben ropes than with the katana," continued Akeginu. Naruto grasped the ropes with a smile. Finally something new to learn. He'd spent the last 2 years learning fundamentals, so it was going to be nice to train in something different for a while. While Naruto was daydreaming about training with the ropes, Akeginu was thinking possibilities. If the boy proved adept with the Aben ropes, she could teach him to use the sword and ropes simultaneously. Yes, he could use the sword to draw an opponent's attention while attacking them from the flanks with the ropes. 4. She was practically giddy with the idea of teaching Naruto such a technique. By the time she was done with him, the boy would be one of, the strongest nin in history. 2 years later, Naruto aged 10, 1 month before academy. Naruto stood still, eyes focused on the straw training dummy in front of him. Drawing a deep breath, he raised both of his arms out in front of his body, his wrists limp, fingers hanging loosely, pointed at the ground. With a slight flick of his fingers, the ground on either side of him erupted in a cloud of dust as an unseen force flew from Naruto's hands towards the dummy at an astounding speed. As the twin forces moved towards the dummy, they left behind 2 deep surgical incisions in the ground. To most experienced nin, it would look like 2 blades made from wind were heading towards the dummy. However, that was merely the impression given by the invisible force. In reality, no chakra was being used, and the force was actually 2 invisibly thin ropes moving from Naruto's fingers. The 2 ropes overshot the dummy and then, nothing. Naruto groaned. He'd overshot the target once again. Damn, why won't it work? A frustrated Naruto asked himself. The ropes were supposed to arc around the target, allowing him to wrap the target in the ropes and squeeze until the ropes sliced through the armor and into flesh. However, he just couldn't get the ropes to arc around the target like he wanted them to. Grasping the ropes with his calloused fingertips, he let out a sigh. It was going to take a lot of hard work to be able to move around a battlefield while using these. He'd taken to wearing long fingerless black gloves that reached his forearms. The gloves allowed him to wrap the ropes around his wrist for easy deployment and protection. It also allowed him to block a sword strike with his wrists. 2. It had taken 6 months just to learn how to handle the ropes without cutting himself to pieces. He had more than a few scars on his fingers and hands. The ropes were truly deadly weapon, as dangerous to the wielder as they were to the enemy. It would take years to learn how to use them effectively. Akeginu sensei had told him that nothing would be able to touch him once he mastered the Aben ropes, but also that it was a long road to full mastery of the technique. After learning how to handle the ropes, he had started to learn how to deploy them. Akeginu said that eventually he'd be able to control the ropes with his feet as well as his hands, but he was years away from that level of control. At the moment, even the most basic attacks were impossible as he was unable to achieve the degree of accuracy required to aim the ropes. "Stupid ropes won't do what they're told," muttered Naruto. While Naruto was cursing his ropes, he failed to notice someone sneaking up behind him until 2 slender arms wrapped around his shoulders. "Got ya, Naruto-kun," teased a sly Akeginu. "You know, if I were an enemy you'd be dead by now." "Not fair, I was distracted," said Naruto, knowing full well that fairness had no place in the world of shinobi. "Of course you were, that's the perfect time to strike," replied Akeginu. She was playing with him again. It was a common occurrence. He was more than a bit disconcerted that she could still sneak up on him without him sensing her. "Looks like I still need more training," he reflected. One day he hoped he could return the favor. Naruto considered his sensei for a moment. She was a strange one. One moment she was cold and infallible. This was often the case when she was in what he had come to call sensei mode. the next she was teasing and playful like she was right now. When appropriate, she was also capable of showing compassion. During one of the few times Naruto was in need of someone to lean on, she would provide for him without hesitation. He still remembered a moment of weakness he had shortly after meeting her. Flashback. Naruto age 6. Naruto sat on the ground in contemplation. He wondered why his life turned out the way it did. Why was he forced to carry the burden of the Kyuubi? That particular revelation had been an unpleasant surprise, but at least he knew why he was hated, irrational though it was. What he wondered more than anything else is what happened to his parents and why he was forced to face these hardships alone. "What's wrong, Naruto?" asked Akeginu, concerned about the boy's demeanor. A cloud of depression was hanging over the boy. "I was just thinking about my parents," Naruto replied. "Oh," said Akeginu. She knew he was an orphan and that he likely had some abandonment issues. The trauma he suffered before meeting her would have only compounded those issues. "Do you think my parents loved me?" Naruto asked. "Of course they did, Naruto. All parents love their children. Then why am I always alone?" Akeginu paused. She knew she had to tread carefully here. "Given the time you were born, it's more than likely that they were a victim of the Kyuubi attack." Naruto clenched his teeth at that. He had considered that fact but didn't want to admit that something inside him, something so intimately connected to him, had been responsible for his parents' deaths. It was yet another painful factor in his life to be attributed to the fox. He didn't know which was worse, that his parents didn't want him and abandoned him, or that they were dead and he'd never be able to meet them. A single tear started to fall down his cheek. The feeling of loneliness could be so crippling sometimes. Akeginu reached out and pulled Naruto into her. "Don't cry, Naruto. You'll never be alone again." End flashback. Naruto frowned at his memory. Looking back at it, he was a bit embarrassed at his behavior, though deep down he knew that an emotional outburst like that had been necessary. He'd have probably gone crazy otherwise. He had no desire to carry those emotions around like a burden for the rest of his life. At the time he was surprised that Akeginu hadn't just hit him in the head and told him to man up like she usually did whenever he would complain about something. But now, having known the woman for several years, he knew that she was aware that mental issues could cripple the strongest warriors. He had little doubt that she knew he needed to work those emotions out of his system before they became a hindrance, that or maybe she just liked him and didn't want to see him upset. He never really knew what was going on in that pretty head of hers. Since then, they had become very close. She was his sensei and his one true friend. He tried not to think about the fact that his only friend was a dead person. He was reasonably close to Ayame-san from the ramen store, though his visits to the place were rarer now. He had to dress up in that orange get-up whenever he went to the village, so he tried to keep his visits to the absolute minimum, but she was more of a good acquaintance than a real friend. He kept a lot of secrets from her after all. He was still close to the Hokage, though there was some tension there from the fact that the old man was hiding the fox from him. He knew the old man had noticed it, but to date he hadn't brought it up. He visited him about once per week, again in the orange get-up. He didn't want to arouse the old man's suspicion lest he used that ball of his to spy on him. He'd caught a glimpse of the crystal ball on one of his previous visits. No, Akeginu was the one person he relied on more than anyone else and the only person he really trusted. He felt more connected to this long-dead village than he ever felt to Konoha, a place that held only bitter memories for him. Akeginu arched her finely sculptured eyebrows at her pupil. He seemed to be thinking about something. He was always thinking about something. "I suppose that's my fault," she thought. She'd given him all of Tenzen's old writings on military strategy and ninpo tactics. No doubt her pupil was over-analyzing her actions again. Akeginu let out a sigh. She had come to talk to Naruto about some new training, but she wasn't finished having fun with the boy just yet. Naruto could play the cold, calculating prodigy act quite well, but she knew which buttons to push to get a rise out of him. "If you're done playing with your ropes, I have something to teach you," said Akeginu with a grin. Naruto twitched at that. "Playing?" he thought. "I'm not playing with anything," he replied in an annoyed tone. Crap, he kicked himself mentally. He knew she was trying to goad an outburst out of him and he had just given her the satisfaction of seeing him riled up. "What are you going to teach me?" Naruto asked, purposely ignoring his previous comment and the teasing sensei who currently had her head resting on his shoulder. "Blood projection," she whispered in his ear. Naruto was surprised at this, and if he was being completely honest with himself, a little uncomfortable with her close proximity, but she was going to teach him another of Iga's secret techniques. Free. Finally, I can move on from that stupid water walking practice, thought Naruto. He had learned all the chakra control exercises over the last year after Akeginu sensei had him break into the library and borrow a pile of books on the subject of chakra, a concept still foreign to her. She'd studied the books and concluded that Naruto needed to learn how to control his chakra, which would be higher than normal because of the fox. After all, control was key to using any power, chakra or otherwise. He'd mastered all those exercises months ago and had learned Hange no Jutsu to practice his chakra usage. It was pretty easy. He'd taken to using his old image of an orange tracksuit wearing moron and walking around the village. It saved having to change his clothes and cover his hair every time he went into the village. Now he'd finally get to learn his first Iga Jutsu. Akeginu had been tight-lipped in regards to Iga ninjutsu. Apparently most of them were dangerous to use and she didn't want him learning them till he was older. Wow, I'd figured you get me to learn another easy technique like Bunshin or something, said Naruto. Well, you'll be starting academy this year so we'll have less time to train. I would rather teach you some of the Iga Jutsus while I have you here all the time. You can learn those beginner ones anytime, even at that poor excuse of a learning institution. Akeginu had visited the academy in Sprit form, and she was less than impressed at what she saw. Children were sent out into the field as genin without anything near the level of training required. None of them would have lasted a second against genin from Iga, something Naruto would make patently obvious in the future. The state of the kunoichi was particularly appalling. 90% of the girls were only there to ogle the boys, disgraceful. Any self-respecting kunoichi should have the boys eating out of the palm of her hand. They didn't even teach seduction techniques there. Moving on to the matter at hand. Alright, pay attention, said Akeginu with a clap. My blood projection technique allows me to manipulate my own blood. So watch and learn. With that, Akeginu started secreting blood from the pores in her skin. Naruto had to admit it was a very disturbing image. Blood literally started pouring from her eyes and face. Suddenly the blood defied physics and leapt out at him, hitting him straight in the face. Gross. He'd managed to close his eyes before the blood blinded him, but it was now all over his face. Wiping his face with his hands, he opened his eyes and intended to tell Akeginu off but stopped as the entire room was covered in a red mist. He couldn't see a thing. There was a pungent smell of metallic blood in the air as well, which led him to conclude that the mist was actually made from her blood. He couldn't sense Akeginu anywhere either. Got ya, said Akeginu from behind him. She had her kodachi at his throat and a small smile on her face. How did she get behind me like that? Thought a confounded Naruto. He should have sensed her moving, but he had sensed nothing. Did the mist affect him that much? The blood quickly dispersed and Akeginu sheathed her kodachi before coming to stand in front of Naruto. What did you think of that? Akeginu asked. She wanted to hear her students' initial impressions. Useful, said Naruto, contemplating the technique. Tactically, the mist was extremely useful. It pretty much blocked off most of an opponent's most useful senses. Sight and smell were both gone. He said as much to Akeginu. It's also very versatile, noted Naruto, thinking about how she'd almost blinded him as well. You've probably blinded people with that technique more than a few times. Akeginu nodded at her students' observations. I certainly have. In close combat, the blinding trick is particularly useful. The blood mist is amazing. I couldn't sense you at all, said Naruto. He was very impressed. Akeginu smiled at that. The mist is an assassination technique, but you can also use it for tactical withdrawals as well. You're cutting off the opponent's senses. They won't be able to see, hear or smell you, explained Akeginu. Hear? Naruto asked. The blood's droplets interfere with sound waves, unless you're stupidly loud in your movements or you're up against someone with unnaturally sharp hearing. Also, you'll be literally saturating the atmosphere with your chakra as well, so nobody will be able to sense your chakra either. Wow, said Naruto, thinking of the possibilities. With that technique he could approach any opponent in complete invisibility, his very own silent killing technique. Naruto was now even more excited. He'd never seen a technique like this before and he was pretty sure none of the Konoha shinobi could do anything similar. You can also use the blood to tag an opponent. You'll be able to track anyone you smear with your blood no matter how good they're at hiding themselves. Naruto liked the idea of that. So you ready to bleed? Akeginu asked with a slightly creepy smile. Naruto cringed a little. This was going to be one of those torture sessions masquerading as training. Now don't look like that, we'll only train for a couple of hours. I've got an assignment I want you to complete tonight, said Akeginu as she dragged Naruto towards their training ground. 2 hours later, Akeginu and Naruto sat down in Naruto's makeshift house. He'd fixed up one of the old ruins to live in as a project shortly after he decided to move here permanently. What's the test? Naruto asked. He was cautious. The last test she had him go on involved extracting venom from one of those huge spiders in the forest. That didn't work out well for anyone involved. I want you to infiltrate the Hokage residence and steal something valuable. Naruto was intrigued. That was one of the most well-protected places in Konoha. He might be able to run around Anbu in broad daylight, but this time they would be on guard and completely serious. He'd be in a lot of trouble if he was caught there. He smiled at that. He loved a good challenge. When do I start? 2 a.m. Location: Hokage residence, Konoha. Naruto jumped down from the wall that surrounded the Hokage's house. With a few quick steps he was at the side of the building and started scaling it. After a few minutes he reached his entry point, a window on the eastern face of the building. It only took him a couple of seconds to unlock the window before sliding stealthy in through the opening. Entry complete, Naruto whispered to himself. Getting into the building had been laughably easy. Security was so bad even an idiot with only the barest basics of ninja training could have gotten in. He didn't know whether to laugh or be concerned. Although there had been a few Anbu patrolling the area, the tower was surprisingly sparse when it came to security. These chumps are lucky I'm not an assassin, thought Naruto, with his opinion of Anbu lowering with every unhindered step he took deeper into the building. The corridors were completely empty. He had already decided what he wanted to steal. The Hokage kept a number of sealed scrolls here, so he'd be relieving him of one of them. 4. With a bit of luck they wouldn't even notice someone had ever taken one. Moving on, he crept towards the room that housed the scrolls but stopped. He heard something. Someone was moving in his direction quickly. They would be on him in a few seconds. He resisted the urge to draw his katana. This was an infiltration mission. His sharp eyesight caught a glimpse of the Hokage moving his way. Did he sense me? Thought a worried Naruto. Thinking quickly, Naruto made the ram hand seal. With a poof, Naruto was replaced with henge. He smiled and waited for the Hokage. The Hokage had awoken a few minutes earlier. He'd sensed someone moving through his house. The sensation was faint, barely any presence at all. Whoever it was, they were very, very good, but he wasn't Hokage for nothing. He may be half blind, but his other senses were still top-notch. With a grumble he got out of bed and went to investigate. He intended to give a piece of his mind to whoever interrupted his sleep. Walking quickly he made his way down to where he sensed the faint presence. He was sure whoever it was down this corridor. He couldn't see the person yet as his eyesight was pretty bad these days, but he could sense them. He felt a slight chakra spike, faint but it was there. The person had just done something. Moving quickly down the corridor he came face to face with the person who was standing before him, making absolutely no effort to hide. The sight caused his mind to freeze. He stood mouth agape in shock. Standing before him stood the most beautiful woman he'd seen in years, and she was naked. Midnight black hair, flawless white skin, and those the Hokage couldn't take in anymore. His perverse thoughts sent his mind into overdrive, and any further thoughts were halted by a massive nosebleed which sent the old man flying backwards. He slipped into unconsciousness with a stupid grin on his face. Naruto smirked at the pervert's unconscious form. The man may be the strongest ninja in the village, but he had one glaring weakness: he was a huge pervert. Naruto had seen him reading those Icha books on more than one occasion. He knew that the Hokage wouldn't be able to handle seeing his sensei naked, though admittedly he thought it'd only distract the old man enough for him to make his escape, not knock him out completely. He would have sweat dropped if he wasn't in such a serious mood. He had almost been caught. His smirk turned into a frown as he observed the old man still had a perverted smile on his face even while knocked out. No doubt dreaming about his sensei. She'd kill him if she ever found out what he'd done. He thought that was a bit hypocritical. He knew she wasn't above using her charms to complete a mission, but he was pretty sure she'd still kill him for using this particular henge. She'd probably be very interested in how I knew what she looked like naked, thought a worried Naruto. Shaking off thoughts of his impending demise, Naruto left the Hokage lying in the corridor and proceeded to the room where the scrolls were located. Naruto stopped and examined the door for traps. Finding nothing, he opened the door and stepped into the room. Naruto observed that the room was full of scrolls. 5. Are all these scrolls forbidden techniques? You'd think they would have the room sealed or some sort of security system in place for something so important, commented Naruto. It was like they had never conceived that someone would break into the Hokage's house. Fools, thought Naruto, they were basically asking for someone to steal their forbidden techniques. The vaults back in the ruins had more traps than you could poke a stick at. Most of them were pretty dangerous as well. That acid one was nasty. He looked at the collection of scrolls poorly organized on the shelf. He had no intention of stealing a bunch of forbidden techniques. They were forbidden for a reason, and he had no immediate desire to get himself killed. He was just here for one scroll. He randomly picked a scroll from the wall and unsealed it. Taju Kage Bunshin? A clone technique? He was intrigued. Why would a clone technique be forbidden? He could find out later. It was time to make an exit. He briefly considered taking another scroll but thought better of it. He didn't want them to notice anything missing, and he already had one problem tonight with the old man. Naruto withdrew the spare scroll he had strapped to his back. He had brought a replacement which he had swiped from the library. It looked pretty much the same except it wasn't sealed and contained a basic henge no jutsu. He replaced the forbidden scroll with the fake. Hopefully they wouldn't actually open every scroll. Strapping the scroll to his back, Naruto passed the unconscious Hokage and made his way out of the compound the same way he entered and back to the ruins. Easy. Look what I've got, exclaimed a triumphant Naruto as he entered the ruins. Akeginu looked over at Naruto. He had a smile on his face and was waving a large scroll around. You're back. And does that scroll mean you were successful? Sure does, said Naruto, walking up to Akeginu. Any trouble? Akeginu asked. Nope, lied Naruto. He had no intention of informing his sensei about the Hokage incident. Security was surprisingly light, so I had no trouble entering and exiting the building. No traps in the room protecting scrolls either. That's odd. She couldn't understand why they would leave a room with a forbidden scroll in it unprotected. Was it of no value to them? Only one way to find out, I suppose. So, what did you end up taking? Akeginu asked. Taju Kage Bunshin. It's a forbidden technique from the Hokage's library. A clone technique? Akeginu asked. She didn't know why a clone technique would be forbidden. Techniques were only forbidden if they were dangerous to the user or were just so terrible that they were deemed unacceptable to use. Though the latter was a foreign concept to her. In her time there was no such thing. Iga operated under the by means necessary principle. There are some other techniques there as well, but nothing I recognized. Open it up, said Akeginu. She wanted to see what made this clone technique deserving of the classification, forbidden. Naruto opened up the scroll and they both started reading it. It seems it makes solid clones, said Naruto. Interesting. Solid clones, they would require a lot of chakra, but that doesn't seem reason enough to make it forbidden though. A high chakra requirement shouldn't be a problem for Naruto. Give it a try, said Akeginu. Naruto made the requisite hand seals and poof, several clones of himself appeared. Naruto walked over to one and flicked it in the forehead. Oh, said the clone. Yep, definitely solid, observed Naruto. Akeginu walked around one of the clones in a circle before quickly drawing her kodachi and slashing it across the clone's throat. Naruto flinched as the clone dispelled. The memories from the clone's death were filtered back to him. Amazing, I just received the clone's memories, thought Naruto as the experience of having his throat cut played out in his mind. What's wrong, Naruto? Akeginu was watching Naruto with confusion. He had flinched when she dispelled the clone, and was now standing there with a blank look on his face. Was it just a reaction to her killing his clone or something else? I felt that kill. You felt what? Akeginu asked. She didn't understand what he was talking about. Felt that kill. When you killed the clone, its memories filtered back to me, answered Naruto. He was still trying to process what had just happened. Now, that got her interested. The clone's memories could go back to the original when it's dispelled. Amazing, think of the possibilities. You could have the clones read a book and receive all the knowledge, or you could have them train and receive the experience training. She didn't know if the clones were intelligent enough to understand what they were reading or if muscle memory worked like that, but she was certainly going to have Naruto find out. It also solved their academy problem. Naruto could just send a shadow clone instead. Thinking quickly, Akeginu looked at Naruto. Alright Naruto, here is what we're going to do. I want you to test this jutsu out. Find out how long you can maintain the clone for, and how many you can create at one time. Then I want you to investigate this memory aspect. If it works like I think it does, we may be able to use it with your training. Do it carefully though, we still don't know for sure why it was sealed. Quote. Naruto just looked at her. That was a mouthful. He was still trying to wrap his head around dying like that. Well, what are you waiting for? Get to it. Naruto sighed. It was impossible to stop her when she got thinking about his training. On the plus side, he had a new technique to learn. The Hokage sat in his office contemplating the night's events. A person had infiltrated his tower without any of his Anbu noticing. She had to be exceptionally talented to achieve such a thing. How did she get in anyway? She wasn't exactly inconspicuous. Anbu must have been sleeping on the job to miss her no matter how good she was, or perhaps she used some technique that might explain why she was naked. He smiled at the memory. It had been a long time since he'd seen something that good. She hadn't even taken anything. Upon waking up, he had immediately called Anbu and had them search for the woman, but to no avail. He also had Anbu take an immediate inventory to see if anything was stolen, but it seemed nothing had been disturbed. Was she a spy then, looking for confidential information? Perhaps he had scared her off, not likely since he had been unconscious, but it may have been enough for her to call off whatever mission she was on. She was probably scouting out the tower. Whatever the reason, security would have to be tightened after tonight's incident. He couldn't have intruders in his tower. What if she had been an assassin? He may well have died. Oh well, it was no use worrying too much. No one was hurt. Nothing had been stolen, and he'd gotten to see something good. With a perverted grin, he took out one of his Icha books and started reading. He'd have to tell Jiraiya about this next time they met. He'd be so jealous. 1 week later, Naruto smiled at his creation. Standing before him was a carbon copy of himself. Well, almost a carbon copy. He had created a clone that looked like him but not him at the same time. It wore his old orange jumpsuit instead of shinobi clothes and had short spiky hair instead of a long ponytail. Plastered on its face was a big stupid grin that Naruto would never be caught dead making. Yes, this is perfect, thought Naruto. The shadow clones had proven to be a useful technique. He'd discovered that he could indeed use them to train and learn, though there was limits. Finding that out had resulted in the worst headache he'd ever had. It seemed that the brain could only handle so much information at any one time, so one had to monitor how long you used the clones for and regularly dispel rather than just leave them for days on end. Akeginu didn't want the clones learning new things. She was still suspect as to their intelligence, so any new skills or techniques were his responsibility. However, she let him use the clones to shore up his fundamentals and chakra control. He'd also send a few to the library with instructions to read anything they could get their hands on. Hopefully by the end of his training he'd have read the entire library. Yes, the clones had proven very useful and he was about to put them to further use. He had big plans for this particular clone, big plans. Over the past few years his presence in Konoha had been reduced significantly. He was still around, but there was a marked drop-off in his appearances. He'd taken to dressing up in his old clothes when in the village, and after he learned transformation jutsu he had simply hanged into his former self around the village. But except for a weekly visit to the ramen stand and the Hokage, he wasn't really in the village at all. It was time to change that. Anbu no longer watched him anymore. Once the beatings had stopped, around the same time he met Akeginu, the Hokage had stopped having Anbu watch him all the time. He made sure his apartment also looked used, though he hoped no one looked in the fridge. When was the last time I changed the milk? It only appeared that Naruto was still in the village. Some people still spat at him whenever he showed his face in the streets, but he had been seen less and less as the years went on. However, that couldn't go on. He couldn't risk the Hokage using his ball to find out where Naruto was all the time, or one of the Anbu getting too curious and following him. Therefore it was time to reintroduce Naruto to Konoha, and this clone would be his instrument to do so. He planned on casting an illusion over the whole village. The only catch was he wasn't going to use any genjutsu. Starting today the village would fall under his illusion. With some sleight of hand and a single clone he'd make them think that he was nothing more than an idiot who was no threat to anyone. He couldn't see the villagers leaving him alone if he revealed himself to be a highly dangerous shinobi. He had provided the clone with a specific set of instructions. He noticed if you gave them too much freedom they could go off and do their own thing. The clone was not to use any of his Iga techniques, period. Secondly, the clone was to act like someone who had not received an excellent education over the last 6 years. He was to be stupid. He wanted his ranking to be near the bottom of the class. He'd also given the clone a couple of annoying catchphrases to spout from time to time. Yep, he'd be one annoying personality. He also gave the clone permission to go prank without restraint. With the clone out in the village and at the academy, he would be free to finish his training as an Iga shinobi without interruption. Akeginu estimated that he'd be ready in about 6 more years, which would mean he may have to fail the academy once or twice, but that was of no consequence. His Iga Ryu would far exceed anything he could learn at the academy. 5. It would be a masterstroke of deception and incidentally his greatest prank to date. He was confident, people were stupid and the ones in Konoha particularly so. They'd have no problem believing whatever negative image he presented them with. Amazing to think that to fool an entire village he'd only needed a single clone and a large dash of stupidity. Well, sensei did always say that the simplest deceptions were usually the best. With that thought, he ordered the clone to head to his apartment in the village and begin its new life. 1 year later, Naruto, age 11. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, quite capable of getting you killed if you don't keep a handle on it. It has its benefits, to be sure. Often it's a catalyst for many great discoveries, but more often than not it only gets you in trouble. Naruto was a naturally inquisitive person. It had a tendency to get him in trouble now and then, particularly if that inquisitiveness involved finding out what Akeginu looked like under that kimono of hers. But right now Naruto was curious as to what was happening inside the Uchiha clan compound. He was currently perched on a tree just outside the compound's walls and was observing something fascinating. 2 figures were literally butchering the entire Uchiha clan like farm animals. Amazing. So much for that vaunted strength the Uchiha clan is always talking about. They're putting up absolutely no fight whatsoever, Naruto observed. Not that he cared. Most of the clan had treated him like trash in the past. In fact, with the exception of Uchiha Itachi, he couldn't say he thought well of any of them. He had a high opinion of Itachi. The man was a consummate professional, if a little odd. He also knew that Itachi had been responsible for saving his life several times before he became aware of his heritage. He was also unfailingly polite whenever they had met in the past. Not that that would stop him from killing Itachi if he needed to. What was interesting was that he recognized one of the figures killing the clan as Itachi. Why would he be killing his own clan? It didn't make any sense, and who's the creep in the orange mask? So many unknowns were making Naruto curious. Yes, curiosity is definitely dangerous. Should he risk his life to try and find out what the hell was going on or just sit here and enjoy the show? After a couple of minutes of indecision, Naruto heard a child scream in agony. He recognized the voice. It was Itachi's brother Sasuke. He didn't know much about the kid. Most children of the noble clans tended to display the typical arrogance and unjustified sense of entitlement expected of them fairly earlier in life. So he can't say that he was interested in meeting the boy. However, the boy's screaming was enough to get Naruto leaping towards the compound. Caution be damned. He wanted to find out what the hell was going on. There was nothing he hated more than unknowns. Itachi was exhausted, more emotionally than physically. He had just finished dealing with his brother Sasuke and felt drained by the act. In fact, the entire night's events were weighing on him heavily. What a mess, he thought. I actually did it. I just killed my own family and tortured my little brother. There was no going back now. 1. Not that he had much choice in the matter. The greater good governed his actions here tonight. Sometimes you had to remove an infected limb no matter how painful the amputation might be. Despite his exhaustion, Itachi still had the presence of mind to sense that he was being watched. Whoever it was hiding their presence well. He could barely sense them. Judging by their ability to conceal their presence, it was probably a Jonin, which was problematic to say the least. Tonight's events had been planned carefully and he couldn't have anyone alerting Anbu before he was ready to leave the scene. He looked around with his newly acquired Mangekyo Sharingan. Examining his surroundings, his new eyes were able to spot a figure on a nearby roof clinging to the shadows. He could only just see the figure. Considering how sharp his eyesight was while the Mangekyo Sharingan activated meant that the figure was exceptionally well concealed. "Got you," he said. He immediately performed a shunshin and appeared on the roof right next to the figure. He was surprised when the figure didn't jump back in shock or move to attack him. In fact, the figure didn't move at all except for a slight tilt of the head in his direction as if to acknowledge his presence. This was disconcerting. The figure was either very competent or had extraordinary calm nerves, likely both. With a sigh, the figure spoke, "Well, it looks like you spotted me, Itachi-san." Itachi's eyes narrowed slightly, both at the mention of his name and the voice. He recognized the voice, but it didn't match with the figure standing in front of him. This figure had long blonde hair tied in a ponytail, black shinobi clothes with distinctive sleeves, and had katana strapped to his waist. Yet the voice was of his former charge, a short, orange-wearing loudmouth. Although he hadn't seen Naruto in a while, he was positive that this wasn't him. "Who are you?" he demanded. He loosened his limbs ready to attack. He wanted this issue resolved as soon as possible. You don't recognize me, Itachi-san? That hurts my feelings," said the figure. "Naruto?" Itachi asked. Could it really be him? One and the same. "It's been a few years, Weasel-san," said Naruto as he turned to face Itachi. The only indication Itachi was surprised was the slight widening of his eyes, which to those who knew him meant that he was in fact very surprised. The reason for his surprise was that the eyes staring him in the face were cold and calculating eyes, eerily similar to the ones he now wore when his Sharingan was not activated, ruthless eyes. He could see them assessing him, and truthfully speaking, it was a little unnerving. Was this how people felt when he looked at them? Itachi was having difficulty reconciling this figure with the Naruto he knew. Where was the loud, obnoxious kid? Where was the orange? This Naruto has been mentally conditioned. Did Danzo get his hands on him? No, the Hokage would never allow that, and this banter is something no root agent would do. Whoever taught him, they're good. To be able to get Naruto to this level so quickly, most Jonin can't hide their presence this well. He might even be as good or better than I was at the same age. Though that shouldn't be surprising, he thought, considering who his parents were. The connection between Naruto and two of the village's most famous personalities was patently obvious. He had Kushina's face and the Yondaime's eyes and hair. How anyone couldn't recognize the connection was beyond him, but people are stupid like that. His own clan's treatment of him demonstrated that rationality rarely dominated group mentalities. They often ignore what's right in front of them, instead choosing to follow irrational emotions. All most people tended to see when they looked at Naruto was the Kyuubi, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Naruto was just a little boy. Or at least he used to be. Naruto's presence here was problematic though. Itachi didn't want to kill the boy. For starters, he had no idea what effect killing the vessel would have on the Kyuubi. For all he knew, killing Naruto would free the demon right in the middle of the village, and that would be an unmitigated disaster. He never understood why some of the villagers would risk attacking the boy like they did. No, he had to incapacitate Naruto, but he couldn't leave Naruto here either. That would raise questions and Anbu would be forced to interrogate him. Worse, he could end up in Danzo clutches, just like Sasuke could have. Itachi wouldn't want anybody to end up in that monster's hands. He couldn't take the boy with him though. His next assignment was too important, and he'd have enough heat on him without stealing a Jinchuriki. No, he'd have to use a Genjutsu, incapacitate him, then drop him off somewhere in the village before he left. Resolved, he acted. "I'm sorry, Naruto, but I cannot let you leave here." With that, he activated his Sharingan, intending to knock Naruto out under a basic Genjutsu. However, as soon as the pinwheel started spinning, Itachi felt a sharp pain shoot into his eyes, bringing him to his knees. He clutched his right eye in pain. It felt like someone had just shoved a fork in it. Despite the pain, he had the presence of mind to notice that his Genjutsu had failed. What just happened? Itachi asked himself. Itachi was so uncharacteristically surprised he failed to notice the smirk that appeared on Naruto's face. He didn't have the chance to think any further because Naruto had drawn his katana and slashed at his head in an astonishing display of Iaido. Too fast. But Itachi was not considered a genius for nothing. He recovered from the shock extraordinarily quickly, but still only barely dodged the attack. He felt the wind brush his throat as he skipped back out of range of the blade. Most Jonin would have been killed by that draw. Hayate doesn't know Iaido, so where did he learn it? He was brought out of his thoughts by a few follow-up attacks. Naruto swiped at him, forcing him to dodge. He heard the blade slice through the air as it narrowly missed him. Naruto followed up with another vertical slash which Itachi dodged comfortably by moving forward and to the left of the attack. Naruto was fast for his age, but this was only high genin speed, chunin at most. Itachi could dodge that in his sleep. He had observed enough, it was time to make his move. He closed the distance between them, moving directly in front of Naruto, ready to respond with an attack of his own when he caught sight of Naruto bleeding profusely in front of him. What, genjutsu? No, I'd have sensed that. That must be real blood. But I haven't attacked him yet. Naruto, what? Before he could continue, the blood, much to his surprise, leapt out at him and hit him straight in the eyes. Ah, he cried out in pain. This was not good. He couldn't believe it. Naruto had surprised him not once but twice. The blood was completely blocking his sight, he couldn't see a thing. Only his intuition and sharp hearing saved him from a multi-direction attack from behind. He managed to dive out of the way just as the ground erupted in slashes from several directions. Futon? No, he didn't sense any chakra being used. How did Naruto do that? Itachi could barely see Naruto standing a few feet to his right. He didn't want to use any ninjutsu on the boy and risk killing him, so that left taijutsu. Shit, he cursed uncharacteristically. He was barely standing after killing the entire clan, his Sharingan wasn't working, and his vision was now impaired by Naruto's blood. He was in no condition for a taijutsu fight. He'd have to end this quickly. He rushed at Naruto with speed well beyond most jonin. He launched a fist at Naruto's face that Naruto dodged. He was not surprised this time. Given everything else he'd seen tonight, it was reasonable to assume Naruto's taijutsu and reaction speeds were top-notch too. He followed that up with a sweep kick intending to take Naruto's legs out from under him. However, Naruto cartwheeled over his takedown and responded with a kick to his chest, forcing him to step back. He tried to move forward but was attacked again, this time from the left. As he dodged, he felt something cut deep into his left triceps and looked down. A razor-thin wire had almost penetrated to the bone. With a grimace, he stepped to the right, leaving the wire behind. With his left arm limp at his side, Itachi considered his options. This fight was quickly getting out of hand. He needed to leave before Anbu got here, and it was starting to look like Naruto could fend him off long enough for that to happen unless he started to get serious. Any further thought was put on hold as Itachi's body was suddenly wrapped up in those wires. He managed to use a kawarimi just in time before his body was dissected, leaving pieces of log to scatter over the ground. Enough of this, he couldn't risk dying here, there was still so much he had to do. As much as he would like to investigate Naruto's skills further, he would have to withdraw. He looked over to Naruto, who was now standing on the building opposite him. Enough of the blood had drained from his eye for him to notice that Naruto had wire tensed between his hands and arms. Amazing technique that, he thought. He'd definitely have to have another go at getting past those wires, but it would have to wait, it was time to go. Well done, Naruto. Consider this your victory. It was, most instructive. Be warned though, I will balance the scales the next time we meet, said Itachi as he disappeared in a flock of crows. Naruto let out a sigh of relief as Itachi left the scene. Next time we meet? Naruto wondered what Itachi meant. He seemed awfully sure of that. That had been too close. Fortunately for him, Itachi had chosen to attack him with his Sharingan rather than immediately overpower him physically. Caught a lucky break there, thought Naruto. Reflecting on his encounter, he definitely needed more training. He was pushed to the full extent of his skills and Itachi wasn't even serious. On the plus side, he got to test out his Aben ropes and they were as good as he thought they would be, but he still needed a lot more work before he could move around and use them simultaneously. Sensei is going to kill me. That is if he ever got around to telling her what he got up to tonight. He wasn't sure he wanted to risk the tongue lashing that was sure to follow. Itachi landed in a nearby clearing. He'd managed to extract himself from Konoha with no trouble. Unless you count Naruto, he thought. He was still trying to process what had just happened. Did I really just lose to an 11-year-old boy? Itachi asked himself. He was replaying the entire incident over in his mind. Naruto had performed complex attack after complex attack. Where did he learn the sword? Kenjutsu wasn't part of the academy's curriculum and Iaido certainly wasn't, that's a samurai technique. Where did he learn how to control blood? No one knew anything like that in Konoha. He had just finished getting the last of that blood out of his eyes, that had been unpleasant to say the least. Where did he learn that razor wire technique? He'd never seen someone use wires like that before. A bunch of questions, all he had was questions. It was obvious Naruto was being taught by someone extremely competent. Who though? No one had that skill set in Konoha, so he must be receiving training from a foreign shinobi. His questions would have to wait though, he needed to get on with his next assignment. Fortunately he was a patient man and was willing to wait till he met Naruto again. In fact he was looking forward to it. Now, where did Madara get to? With that Itachi left Konoha to start his career as an S-class criminal. Resolve. Resolve in every action you take is the way of the ninja. Act without it and your sword will be blunt, your strikes will be shallow, and your decisions will be indecisive. Without resolve you leave yourself, your allies and anyone under your protection vulnerable. Without the resolve to kill you have no place amongst the ranks of the shinobi. Tenzen Yakushi-ji, Ego War and Tactics, Vume 1. Naruto stopped reading the passage and considered it. He understood the passage. It was about commitment. Commitment not just to the act of taking a life, but to the lifestyle of a ninja. You either devote yourself to that way of life, to that manner of thinking, or you quit. The world of the ninja is an unforgiving place. It does not tolerate weakness in any form. To continue as a shinobi without resolve would not only endanger your teammates, but likely result in your own death as well. It was harsh, but then so was life. Ninjas didn't have the luxury of believing otherwise. A sword is a weapon. Kenjutsu is the art of using that weapon to kill. If you choose to draw your sword you better have the resolve to use it. To survive as a ninja you need to be committed. To believe that a ninja is some sort of hero is the naive thinking of someone who has no idea of the realities of war. No one walks away from war with clean hands, especially not a ninja. To be a ninja you must understand that a ninja is a disposable weapon, a very specific weapon designed for precision and deniability. To be used and thrown away, said Naruto, thinking to himself. He had no intention of letting Konoha do that to him, but he understood that deniable operations were the fundamental concept behind the ninja, at least when Tenzen wrote this text they were. He wasn't sure about current ninja. They do wear a symbol on their foreheads telling everyone where they're from. Kind of defeats the purpose of being ninja, doesn't it? And what's with those giant heads on top of the village? He sighed. They'd probably make him wear that leaf symbol as well when he graduated. I wonder if there's an actual rule saying you have to wear the thing, or maybe it's just a convention, he thought. He hoped that it was more of a tradition rather than an actual rule. That reminds me, I'll have to get my hands on a copy of the Konoha Ninja Regulations. Over the last 8 years Akeginu had made him read extensively through most of Iga's writings on tactics, strategy and philosophy. She didn't want him having any naive ideas about what it is to be a shinobi, and he didn't. He had lived a harsh life already. Orphaned at birth, living on the streets at 4 years of poking through garbage for food, and having his life at risk on more than a few occasions as a 6-year-old living on his own. No, he had no illusions as to the harsh reality of life. A single decision made by a man he had never met changed his life before it had even really begun. That was the reality of his life, at least up until he met his sensei. Her training had prepared him to deal with such realities and then some. The training of his mind had been a staple of his education ever since he started training with Akeginu all those years ago. According to her, a ninja's mind was as much a weapon as the fist or sword. More often than not, the difference in a fight was whatever tactics were used or improvised. With strategy and tactics, weaknesses could be minimized, strengths maximized, and the weak could overcome the strong. Strength plus good tactics made you extremely difficult to defeat. Similarly, a weak mind could be the difference between success and failure. No matter how strong you are, if you are too stupid to properly direct that strength, then you are useless as a ninja. A poorly considered strategy could prove fatal for even the strongest of nin. So, from age 6 Akeginu had taught him to read properly before providing him with numerous texts on military strategy, tactics, philosophy and politics. She wanted him to have a strong mind, and to be able to maneuver between all battlefields, including the political arena and the battles in his own head. As he got older, he would sneak into the library and borrow books on geography, history and civil governance. Akeginu always told him that information was often the key to victory. He needed to understand his world, so geography was important. He needed to understand his enemies, so history was important. People rarely change, so reading of past wars and feuds could be quite informative about the actions of the current villages and clans. Similarly, understanding the structure of the villages and world's government was important, as the political arena often had a huge impact on the rest of the world. Backroom politics could kill a ninja as easily as any kunai. At the moment, medical texts had his attention. He didn't need them to heal himself because of the fox, but the knowledge was useful nonetheless. Medical knowledge could tell you exactly where to strike an opponent, and how to bring down an enemy with minimal effort. He supposed such knowledge would come in handy if he ever had an injured ally as well. He didn't plan on being a medical nin though. With his discovery of shadow clones, his reading had increased tenfold, as he could get through books 3 to 4 times quicker. It was a double-edged sword though, read too much too quickly and you only develop a shallow understanding on what you read. So he made sure not to use too many clones and have them go slowly through the library. Speaking of clones, right now he was working on a useful application of the shadow clone technique. He learnt that any good strategy is largely dependent on information. You can really make one unless you know what you're fighting against, and the more accurate the information the better. That had been one of the huge benefits he discovered from the clones, their utility as disposable scouts and spies. He'd practiced using a group of clones as a spy network. Creating a small group, and then after making each look a bit different, he sent them out into the village to gather information every day and dispel at night, then repeat the process the next day. It was proving useful. He discovered that the entire village thought he was a moron and that most still hated him. He also found out that the entire village seemed to worship the Uchiha boy for some reason. Obviously none of them read history books, or they might not have been that receptive of the last loyal Uchiha. History shows that the clan never had any real love for Konoha and vice versa. 1 month later, Naruto crouched atop one of the buildings in central Konoha, observing the streets below him. It was almost midnight and the streets were empty except for a lone kunoichi who was wandering, or stumbling rather, down the street, barely putting one foot in front of the other. The kunoichi was oddly dressed in a red blouse wrapped in bandages. She had long, curly black hair and cherry red lipstick. She was very pretty, if he was being honest with himself, though she couldn't hold a candle to his sensei. Right now she appeared to be a bit intoxicated, if her staggering was anything to go by. He shifted his gaze to the group of men following her. There were 4 of them, 3 civilians and 1 Jonin ninja. They were trying to follow the woman and not look suspicious about it. It wasn't working. They were clearly following the woman. In fact, they barely took their eyes off her ass the whole time. He highly doubted their intentions were virtuous. You'd think the Jonin would at least take off the uniform before he attempted to rape someone, thought a disgusted Naruto. Yes, he would perform his first kill tonight. There was no way he was letting them assault this woman. Only the slight shaking of his hands and feet suggested he was nervous, but he was not overly concerned. He was no stranger to violence. Growing up in a hostile environment forced him to mature far quicker than a regular child. He was prepared to do what needed to be done. He just hoped he could be decisive when it really mattered. His only real concern was that the woman was a ninja, so she knew how to handle herself and may very well beat the crap out of the men. The civilians would be no match for her, drunk or not. She was outnumbered though, and one of the men was an experienced ninja. He suspected she'd need assistance. He was brought out of his thoughts when he observed the men quicken their paces. He took a deep breath. It was time to act. With that thought, he attached an Aben rope to the building he was crouched on and jumped off into the darkness below, using the ropes to swing between buildings silently. Kurenai was going to kill Anko tomorrow. I can't believe I let Anko of all people buy me a drink. I know it was her birthday, but what was in it anyway? I can barely walk straight. Walking home, she noticed that the streets were completely empty. She was beginning to regret leaving Anko to walk home alone. Just get home, Kurenai. You're a ninja, no one would even think of touching you, she told herself. Alright, a few more. Someone grabbed her from behind in a tight clinch. Kurenai immediately reacted and stamped down on the assailant's foot. He loosened his grip and she threw her elbow back into the man's face. She felt the assailant's nose break as it came into contact with her elbow. The man let go and she turned around. In front of her were 3 civilians. She was furious. How dare they? Who do they think they are? It's a crime to attack a shinobi. You 3 are in a lot of trouble, she said heatedly to her attackers with barely contained fury. They would be begging for mercy when she was done with them. She was about to put all three under one of the most horrible genjutsus she could think of when someone grabbed her hand from behind and put her in a hold. Damn, I must be more drunk than I thought if I couldn't sense that, she thought. Now she was really in trouble. We don't plan on spending any time in jail, lady, said a voice from behind her. She couldn't see who it was, but the man was strong. She couldn't get out of his hold. The man dragged her with some trouble into a dark alley. This was not going to end well for her. Bitch, stay still, this is happening. We do this the easy way or the hard way. It's your choice whether or not you live through it or not. Kurenai's mind was racing. She was horrified. It was like her worst nightmares were all coming true, but she didn't know what to do. The strength of the men holding her suggested he was a ninja. What do I do? You're a ninja, Kurenai, think. Naruto watched the men grab the woman and pull her into an alley. He was watching from above using chakra to stick to the shadows along the wall. None of them noticed him, of course, not even the two ninja. That'll cost them, he thought. The Jonin had just thrown the kunoichi to the ground hard and all of them were distracted. It seemed things were about to start up. Time to act. With that said, he dropped down to the alley without making a sound, letting his knees and the balls of his feet absorb the fall. Moving forward, he quietly snuck up behind the closest man, one of the civilians. The man hadn't noticed him, too distracted by the sight of the woman on the ground. With no time to waste, he reached his left hand around the man's shoulder, clamping his hand over the man's mouth so he wouldn't make a sound. He then forced the man backwards towards his own body while at the same time driving a kunai straight into his kidney. The man's body tensed as the weapon pierced his flesh and drove deep into his organ. He tried to scream but no sound escaped his mouth. It was a fatal attack, and quickly the man stopped twitching as he bled out. Naruto lowered his first victim to the ground and repeated the process with the second man. Like the first, he performed the kill without making a sound. It was one of the most basic silent killing methods: sneak up behind target and either cut the throat or stab the kidney. He'd practiced this maneuver enough times he didn't need to think, just let his body do the work. Just as he finished lowering the second body, the third civilian turned around to see why his friends were so quiet, and his eyes widened in horror at the sight of his friends' bodies lying on the ground looking quite dead. Moving quickly, Naruto took 2 paces forward, reaching the man within less than a second, and drove his kunai through the bottom of his chin. Unfortunately, this action made some noise and the Jonin started to turn around to see what the fuss was about. Before the Jonin could finish turning around and spot him, Naruto quickly let go of his latest victim, letting him fall to the ground, and jumped onto the alley wall and into the shadows, using his chakra to run quietly along the wall and deeper into the alley. The Jonin turned around and looked at the scene with shock. His 3 friends lay dead and he hadn't even noticed a thing. Naruto watched the fool from the shadows, waiting. His only concern was the women. He was waiting to see if the man would try and use her as a hostage. The man didn't. Instead, he yelled, "Come out, you bastard, you'll pay for killing them." Naruto smiled. He very much doubted that. Good, the man's an idiot. The woman was the only thing keeping him alive, thought Naruto. As soon as the man uttered his last syllable, literally, Naruto sprung from the wall using chakra in his legs to project him forward at a very high speed. As he moved through the air towards the Jonin, he tensed his muscles in his abdomen and arms, preparing to strike. Passing the Jonin, he drew his katana at lightning speed straight through the man's neck using Batojutsu before landing silently on the ground in a roll. Perfect. The maneuver had taken less than a second. He heard the man's head drop to the ground behind him, and didn't even bother looking back. Instead, he flicked the blood off the blade and sheathed it using the traditional Batojutsu method. His attention was now on the woman who was on the ground behind the man. She hadn't moved since he started killing. Now what do I do with you? He wondered. There were options, and killing her wasn't one of them. He didn't go through all this trouble just to kill her because she was a witness. He wasn't concerned about her identifying him. He knew she couldn't. Not only was it dark, but he didn't match anyone's description, certainly not his clones. Nor had he used any distinctive techniques besides Batojutsu. He knew using the ropes would have associated him with this murder permanently, which may well have bitten him in the ass years down the track when he became a shinobi. No, the best course of action was to just leave it be. It was time to go. Kurenai couldn't believe what she just saw. She was about to be raped when suddenly the man, who was leering at her on her left, eyes went wide and he dropped, or rather was lowered slowly to the ground dead. Behind him was a man. No, a boy who only looked to be in his early teens. What the hell is going on? The boy just killed the man like a professional would. The boy proceeded to kill the second civilian by sneaking up and stabbing him in the back as well. And he did it so quietly, she marveled. He killed for a third time as the man with his pants around his ankles turned around and got a kunai through the chin. That was a bit brutal but effective. What amazed Kurenai was that the Jonin hadn't noticed any of the kills. They were silent, perfect assassinations. Just as that thought passed, the Jonin started to turn around, his eyes moving from her to the corpses behind him. He must have heard the third kill. Kurenai was again surprised as the figure leapt onto the wall and literally disappeared into the shadows. Chakra control as well, it must be to be able to stick to the walls like that, she observed. The Jonin man was yelling something out by then, but she wasn't paying attention, instead trying to find the boy who was in the middle of saving her. As if on cue, the boy leapt from the shadows, katana in hand, and cut the man's head off in a single swipe before landing in a silent roll. Amazing, I didn't even see him draw that katana. How skilled is he? Kurenai got a good look at him now. He was wearing a black shinobi clothes and had oddly long sleeves, almost too long as they covered his hands when his arms were hanging down. He had blonde hair tied back loosely in a ponytail and appeared to have some fingerless gloves on. She couldn't see his face as his back was turned to her. She noticed that his katana had only a wooden handle with no guard, quite different from most she had seen before. Not that she had seen many, she reflected, the weapon was not common in Konoha. Yugo and Hayate were just about the only users. Is he from Mist then? Kurenai wondered. The boy turned towards her, but she couldn't get a good look at his face since it was covered by the shadows. She did however notice his eyes, or eye rather, as she could only see the one. It was a striking shade of ice blue, incredibly distinctive and not something she would soon forget. It felt like that eye was piercing her soul as he observed her. Are you all right? The boy was asking her a question. She just nodded her head, not sure yet if she could properly form words at the moment. The boy turned to leave. Wait, she yelled. Who are you? What's your name? Kurenai asked in a flurry. She had never seen this boy before and definitely wanted to thank him properly. I have no intention of telling you my name, not especially after killing 4 people in front of you, one of which was a shinobi, replied the boy in a cold yet oddly melodic voice. They were criminals. It is unlikely you would get in trouble over saving my life. I'm a ninja too, she persisted. She really wanted to know the boy's name. The boy paused as if considering her request. Sorry, but I'd prefer not to attract that much attention, the boy replied. Can you at least tell me your name? I won't tell anyone. I think I'll keep it to myself for the time being. Don't worry, I'm a local, so I'm sure we'll meet again sometime. Until then, pretty lady, said the boy with a smile. Kurenai blushed a little at the boy's comment, but as soon as he made it, he shined away in a cloud of red mist. Wait, damn it, he's gone. So, he's a local, huh? I've never seen any kid like that before. I'll have to check out the academy. If they've got someone that's skilled in academy, you'd think I'd have heard of it by now. With that, she decided to wait around for Anbu to turn up so she could make her report. It's going to be a long night. Akeginu sat in the courtyard of the ruins, waiting. She was nervous, you could tell from the frequent shaking of her knees. Feeling nervous was a frequent occurrence these last few weeks. She hated it. Naruto was out again. Over the last month, he'd taken to staying out late at night looking to complete the task she set for him over a month ago. Now it was in the early hours of the morning and he was still not back. Yep, she hated it. The feeling of powerlessness was repugnant to her. I could have gone with him, she thought, but that was just as bad if not worse. She wouldn't be able to do anything if something did happen. Being a passive observer when someone you cared about was fighting was not something she wanted to experience. So instead she chose to sit here and suffer in ignorance, waiting for the most important person in her world to come back from stalking prey in the village. She didn't know what she would do if something happened to him. After being alone for so long, she didn't know if she could go back to it again. More importantly, Naruto gave her purpose. She had drifted for thousands of years without purpose, without having any contact with another being, just waiting. Waiting for Naruto, it would seem, since he'd been the only one able to see and communicate with her in all that time. These last 8 years had been amongst the best of her life. She had taken him under her wing and he was her responsibility. Teaching again, bringing back the Iga techniques, It brought back so many memories, and watching Naruto grow and master them was an amazing experience. She knew that Naruto would leave the ruins in her one day. He couldn't stay here forever, and she wouldn't allow it. To grow, he had to go out into the world and apply his techniques. She briefly wondered if she would go with him when he left or stay here. She'd just be a ghost following him around. She knew Naruto would pay attention to her. He always did when she was around, but she didn't want to get in his way or stop him from developing any relationships. He still needed to carry on the bloodline after all, for the good of the Iga clan, she thought bitterly. She cleared her mind with a shake of her head. Enough of those thoughts, her mind needed to be in the present. Just as she was finishing chastising herself, Naruto appeared in a cloud of red mist. "I wish I had that technique when I was alive," observed Akeginu in silence, a little jealous of some of the things you could do with chakra. And they don't even use it properly, she thought. It was such a waste. Naruto looked at her inquisitively before asking, "What's wrong with you?" She huffed at that. He shows up at 2 a.m. and had the nerve to ask that. Getting up, she exclaimed, "What's wrong with me? Where have you been? I was about to get up and go find you if you took any longer." Naruto put his arms up in a placating gesture. "Wow, calm down. It just took a bit longer because I finished my task tonight." Akeginu froze at that. He'd done it. "You mean, you killed someone tonight?" "More than one," Naruto replied. "More than one." She didn't like the sound of that. "More than one? How many did you kill?" Akeginu asked, hoping her student didn't go on a killing spree. "4. A group of men were trying to rape a woman. I stopped them." "Oh, alright then, that's fine. Tell me everything," said Akeginu. Naruto explained how he had observed the men, then when they were distracted how he killed them all. "Good work, you killed all of them without them seeing you," praised Akeginu. She was proud that he managed to pull off killing 4 people in close vicinity without letting them notice until their death was at hand. It was not easy unless you killed them all in one hit. "But why didn't you use your ropes or the mist? It would have been easier," Akeginu asked. She knew the answer but wanted him to confirm it. "I could have just cut them to pieces with the ropes, but as far as I know I'm the only one who uses them, so I'd be basically admitting to the murder whenever I used the ropes in public." "Same with the blood mist," explained Naruto. "Good Naruto, you thought about the consequences of your actions." She was very happy. Her student had just performed exceptionally well. "Are you alright? Killing someone is never easy." She knew that better than most. "I'm fine. I was a little nervous before, but afterwards I didn't really feel anything. It needed to be done. I certainly wasn't going to let them get away with what they were doing. Who knows how many women they've raped." Akeginu frowned a little at that. Most people had more volatile reactions to a first kill. She supposed it was because of his childhood. He was far more mature than anyone else his age. She knew that better than anyone else. Hell, he had the mentality of an adult at 8. She concluded that it shouldn't be that surprising that he would have a pragmatic approach to killing. Most experienced shinobi did, and he just developed that mentality faster. Like he does most ninja skills, she thought. It could be a lot worse. He could have enjoyed it. He seemed protective of the women. She approved. There weren't many things worse you could do to a woman. No doubt he saw a little bit of himself in the woman. He had been the victim of abuse from the village, not UAL as far as she knew. Kami she hoped not, but she knew he would have identified with the woman or anyone in that position. How many times had he been chased down a dark alley by a group and been abused? She was proud that he didn't go into a rage and butcher all of them after seeing what they were going to do. Yep, her student had once again done exceedingly well. Should I have expected any differently? It was silly of me to worry, Akeginu chided herself. Now that he was done with his task, it was time for his reward. She had been saving these jutsu in case he was upset after this first kill, but now she could give them to him as a reward for a job well done. "Naruto, come here, I've got something to show you." "What?" Naruto asked. "I've been reading up on some advanced chakra usage and weapons. Apparently you can channel chakra into your weapons to make them more powerful," said Akeginu. Naruto was intrigued. "So I could channel wind chakra into my sword?" "Aha, it says in the book that channeling water into a sword used to be common in Kirigakure, so I imagine channeling wind should make your blade sharper. Possibly a bit longer too." We could do the same with the Aben ropes as well," noted Naruto, who was starting to envisage the different possibilities. He would be able to infuse lightning into his weapons as well. It would make his already dangerous weapon skills even more lethal. I'll start trying it tomorrow, said Naruto, keen to start working on it. Good, how's Fuinjutsu coming along? Akeginu asked. She wasn't familiar with seals, they had been the domain of priests in her time. It's slow work, they don't teach it at the academy and the library has few books on the subject, which is surprising since the Yondaime Hokage was supposed to be an expert at them. I've managed to work out how to seal objects inside a seal. I can carry around spare weapons and clothes now, but that's about it. Handy, observed Akeginu. She again wished she had something like that back when she was alive. Yeah, but nothing compared to the seal on my stomach. From the little I could make out, it's insanely complex. Oh well, keep at it. I'm sure the Hokage will have some material on seals. Once you finish up with that farcical performance your clone is putting on at the academy, you can ask him. Naruto grinned at that. The Hokage would indeed be surprised. Hopefully not so surprised that he had him arrested. Not that anyone would be able to arrest him by that stage. Oh well, he'd just have to take precautions. Are you sure you don't want to talk about tonight? Akeginu asked. She was still a little worried. She wouldn't force the issue, but she thought he should at least talk to her about it. I'm okay, sensei, really. Quote, alright then, be up at sunrise and we can get started on infusing your sword with chakra. Naruto groaned at that. It was fine for her, she was a spirit and didn't sleep, but he'd have to go through training with only a few hours of sleep. That's all for now. If you enjoyed, then please like, share and do comments.